for your information, all of the wines and the winemaker's time has been donated. And that includes the time and talent of Gilles de Chambourg, our moderator. Gilles is perfect for this role. A Parisian by birth, he grew up among the wines of Burgundy and Bordeaux. His first career choice was banking, which also introduced him to fine wines, which led to a career as an international wine negociant. In 1993, Robert Mondavi hired Gilles to be the senior wine indicator at Mondavi. And at that time, he also had a wine business in Chile and Argentina. And he now has a home in Uruguay. So he's armed for this. In 2000, he became a master sommelier, and he now teaches baby sommeliers for the court of the master sommeliers. Besides forming his own wine consulting firm, he's now also president and general manager for Bulgaroni Estates in Napa. Gilles will introduce our speakers and panelists and lead us through these really exceptional wines.
Thank you. Welcome to the Napa Wine Library Seminar. We're very excited to have you here. We're going to talk about a topic that's close to my heart, and it's South America. And of course, we are in the Americas, and I was actually talking to Jancis Robinson not that long ago. She came out with an atlas of American wine. And to the dismay of all our South American friends, it just concentrated on North America and the United States. So it's interesting, if you look at the history of course, of viticulture in the Americas, the first areas to be developed, of course, was South America. You not only had the conquistadores that brought the vines with him, because as they learned from Julius Caesar, an army needs some wine to keep going. And as they invaded the Aztec, the Incas, they brought the vines with them. So the first vineyards, even though the oldest existing vineyard is still in Mexico, were actually down where they conquered the Incas, which was in today's Bolivia, Peru, Chile, and northern Argentina. So there's a long history of viticulture starting from the 16th century in South America. Welcome, Augustine. Take a seat, please. And but like anything, great wines are made in great cycles of civilization, where you have economic stability, long-term vision, you have capital, and of course purchasing power of the consumer. And as we know, these great cycles of civilization have go through cycles, and South America, especially Argentina and Chile, are an exception, and Brazil today, of the ups and downs of economic woes, of political trials, of wars, indecision, and instability, which affects long-term vision and the investment in wine that viticulture needs. So we're going to talk today about really South America as a whole, and we're going to be focusing on the two sort of most important wine producers in South America. Chile, the oldest historically, I would say the more mature, but which went through also is now going through an amazing renaissance, so that would be interesting to talk about that, because they found a way with their ideal climate and their ingenuity and irrigation, and of course the efficiency of the Chilean people to really export fruits and great wines, and now they're really developing their sort of third phase onto foreign investment and onto maybe replanting and looking at the potential of different sites and pushing the edges and taking risks. So we're actually going through an incredible revolution in Chile. So even though it's the oldest maybe classically of the South American countries, it's actually, I look at it as like the newest right now, looking at it more like, you know, Austria or New Zealand or maybe South Africa, like the Renaissance South Africa. And then we'll be talking about Argentina, which is actually the largest producer in volume of South America. Remember, South America is the second largest producer of wine after Europe, the second largest producing continent. And Argentina is fifth largest producer in the world, and we're going to be going in depth to talk about Argentina and also its move away from the domestic consumption, the domestic market, historically due to the Italian and Spanish immigrants, to a really an export-driven and great success to really putting and giving new identities to specific wines like Malbec. We'll be obviously talking about Carmenere when we get to Chile. And then we'll have a very quick presentation on Uruguay, which is the sort of third producer. And then we thought we would start the day with a little sparkling wine from Brazil, which is the first wine you have on your left. So please don't hesitate to start sipping that little wine. And it has, of course, a joyous name. It's called Carnival, just to remind us of the very important Rio Carnival that obviously Brazil is famous for, and soccer and other things. But when we think of the largest river, the Amazon, we think of Brazil and we don't really think of wine. And of course, wine is grown, and you have maps. Make sure that you open your handout. We have a schedule of events, and then we also have maps. The first map would be a quick overview of the whole of South America. So even if I don't include Peru, you can just see the border of Peru, which is obviously where Chile, north, and Iquipe and the Atacama Desert borders with Peru, and both of these countries have a long tradition of growing grapes and table grapes, especially making a beverage called pisco, which is a wine-based alcohol. Bolivia also has its own beverage, Nvwl, that also grows Peru, but have a look at Chile, Argentina, and look at the southern part of Brazil, because most of Brazil's vineyards are in the south, and there have been a lot of German immigrants that moved to this part of Brazil and created wine. Obviously, they're dealing with humidity, which is a bit of an issue. They've planted a lot of historically lots of hybrid varieties, but now they're really getting serious about wine. And the area around the border with Uruguay is really developing the Campania region. I believe the wine we're having now is from the Valle de Viñedos, the Valley of the Vineyards, there in the Sierra Gaucho, and this is in Rio Grande del Sur, in the southwest corner of Brazil. So it's a sparkling wine. Interestingly enough, as you know, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, or the Moet Hennessy group, actually invested in a vineyard there before they invested in the Napa Valley, Chandon. They also invested in Argentina at just about at the same time. And so there's a big development in sparkling wine, so we thought it would be a great way to start this early seminar. Thank you for coming all this early, to start with a little sparkling wine from Brazil. So Brazil is a sleeping giant really in South America. It's a very important market, as you can imagine, for the wines of Chile and Argentina. And the more people can develop their own taste and local economies start in the country, this creates more diversity and more demand, and really it's what we can hope as wine producers around the world. So we're very encouraged in the recent developments of Brazil. So we're going to have, we're very honored to have Agustin Jimenez, the keynote speaker, to come and talk to us. I'm not going to say he's going to talk about Chile, he's actually going to talk about what he wants to talk about for his long career, but I will introduce him. It's a great honor. And then we're going to have some questions, and then we're going to have Enrique, who will introduce at that moment, who's a viticulturist for Nvwl, but an Argentinian native who developed vineyards in Agrelo and Mendoza. And we'll be talking, doing a presentation on Argentina and tasting through the first 5 wines. Then we have a break. People will come, and then we'll pull the wines of Uruguay and Chile for the second half of the program. Okay? So it's a great honor for me to introduce Agustin Jimenez. He's of course the owner of Quintessa Winery here in Napa Valley in Rutherford. He's really been, he was born in Santiago, Chile, and he started actually his business with one of the most famous vineyards, Concha y Toro, that we'll talk about a little later. And so he really took this small winery to become one of the great Chile's largest winery. In fact, Concha y Toro, Concha y Toro produces more wine than the whole country of Uruguay, and we'll talk about it when we talk about Uruguay. He left Chile and went to New York and worked for Seagram's, a worldwide operation, and his responsibility included 14 wineries in 9 countries, including Paul Masson in the United States. On leaving Seagram, he went for Noble Vineyards and worked in California in 1977, and acquired Concannon that I didn't know, which has some very interesting Petit Syrah and other grapes there in the Livermore Valley. And then he became a partner in 1985 of Franciscan Estates, which within Franciscan Estate he owns Mount Vida and Veramonte in Chile, which he created. And when we talked about the Sauvignon Blanc from Casablanca, Agustin will really give us an input on the development of this new region, and that's what's the revolution right now in Chile, and pushing the edge and moving to cooler climates, closer to the ocean, up into the hills, and there's a lot of exciting developments going there. And of course, at Quintessa, he also owns the Prisoner, Faust, they bought the Flowers Winery, and we're going to be talking about his Chilean portfolio today, Ritual, Primus, and Neyen from the famous Colchago Valley. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Agustin Meneas. His son now takes over. He says he is now liberated from the wine business, but he took time to and will be hosting us for lunch. He's also very, he was given the Distinguished Service Award by Wine Spectator. He's been president of, the president of Chile gave him the country's highest civilian honor, El Servicio Meritorios de la República. Felicitaciones. I had the pleasure, of course, the last of his bio says he's very important now in many industry affairs, and he likes to promote his country in the wine industry. Last time we had dinner together, he was seated next to Isabel Allende, the great writer from Chile, so it gives you an idea of Augustin's love of his country and developing the arts, the humanistic aspect, and the wine business. Thank you, Augustin.
I guess the first thing, does this thing work? Hello?
Yes.
Latin American clock works about 10 minutes after the American clock, so I apologize for being late. I'm for him too, by the way, my colleague here from Argentina who was late 15 minutes. Worse than Chile. And I'm very happy to be here. Wines, in spite of the fact that I'm liberated. And but liberation exactly, as opposed to, by the way, you in America, you retire, which is putting one foot in the, you know what, and then putting it off and just get a heart attack. Liberation is after you've paid your dues, after you've done the penalty, the penance actually, which God imposed on man to work in order to get his bread. Remember Genesis? And he kicked Adam and Eve out because they were misbehaving. You shall earn your bread with the sweat of your brow. So that's what we do until about a certain age, and then you're liberated. You pay for that too. Now you can do whatever you want. You've got to keep your marbles sort of in shape, and hopefully your body as well. But it's the best time of life. That's the good news, and that's not what we're going to be talking about today. I often get asked the following question. Do you make wines of equal quality in Latin America or in Chile? They ask me about Chile. And that's a really interesting question.
Can you pull the mic up to your mouth?
Is that a little better?
Yes.
I was saying that I often get asked if we make wines of equal quality in Chile as we do in America. And I think that that's what I'm going to try to get to during this conversation. The wine culture of Latin America is very curious because it goes way back before wine culture in the United States. As a matter of fact, by the way, I brought this book, a huge book, by the way, it weighs a ton, and it's the Bible. It's by Hugh Johnson and Jancis Ross, everybody knows that, I'm sure. And I sort of wanted to know a little more about Uruguayan wines and Brazilian wines, which he doesn't mention. I mean, South America is 2 pages, one Argentina and one Chile. And the book has 400 pages. So you can imagine how unknown and unappreciated our wine culture is. Well, as we say, sugarcane plays a very important role in wine culture, strangely enough. We all talk about the missionaries having brought from the old world the wine culture, but it's not really so. I mean, they did bring grapes, the mission grapes, País or Latin American, I don't know what you call them in other parts, but the mission grape was a good grape, and they made wine, they made ceremonial wine, but they didn't really extend wine culture in any way whatsoever in most of the world. They did not extend wine culture in that world which had an alternative to wine as booze. And let's not forget that wine in history has a very humble beginning, which is basically the basic drink and the basic booze. The aesthetics of wine comes in much later, and we'll get to that. But in most countries of South America, sugarcane was prevalent, and rum was the booze. And that's what people drank. And that's why in countries like Brazil or like Mexico, which have become wine cultures, and by the way, in America, wine did not become wine culture for a long time as well. Not because of rum necessarily, but because of a different sort of colonization process. Where booze was not available, where rum was not available, what happened was that people discovered wine as an alternative, and in countries like Argentina and Chile and Uruguay, that became sort of prevalent. But then there comes a time when there's an aesthetic appreciation of wine. That did not happen right away after the missionaries were there, nor really during the Spanish colonization. It starts pretty much with the independence of these countries, which is in about 1810, 1820. Then people start emulating, societies become independent. There's sort of a middle class and aristocracy, and these societies travel to Europe and they start learning about wine. And there are two different flows of wine into America. One is very, apart from the missionaries, which, as I said, was very preliminary and very limited to their use. The most important influence in Spanish America and in the New America, because California was Spanish America when I'm talking about, was the Italian colonists. They, Martinis, Mondavis, Gallos, in Argentina, it's the same. And they brought it over, and they started it, and developed it, and really became very influential. And very, so it starts from the ground up. Chile is a little different in its culture. Chile definitely did not have rum, so they needed booze. It's a very small country, and Chile became very rich because it was the only country that had natural nitrate, still is. And certain families that owned the nitrate mines became wealthy, and the nitrate mines are way up in the Atacama Desert, a very solitary and boring place to live. And so they said, how are we going to make life, fun? So they said, let's have a vineyard. These are about 5 or 10 families, by the way. And they sent their managers to France with instructions, bring back the best. We sure have the climate here in Chile. Okay, so they went over these people, chargé d'affaires of these families, to Bordeaux, which was a place of fashion then. And they bought everything they saw there. They bought the barrels, they bought plants, and at that time, the vineyards in France, I'm talking about the mid-19th century, 1850 or so, the vineyards in France were planted to all the Bordeaux varieties, as we call them, which are 6, and they were mixed. So when dormancy came about, nobody knew where, what plant was what. So they just picked them, and for the longest time, when I was running Conchitoro, we didn't buy Cabernet, or we didn't buy Merlot. It was Bordeaux. It was very recently that we started separating the different varieties in Chile, because we had inherited from France the mixing of the plants. The theory in France at that time, in Bordeaux at that time, was that all of these varieties yielded pretty much similar profile. They complemented each other, but where they complemented each other most was in the fact that the ripeness came, a little different. So the Merlot would be ripened in Cabernet sometimes and so forth. When phylloxera hit France, their replanting was done with separate vineyards. So France went a different way. Bordeaux went a different way. Chile didn't have phylloxera, never has had phylloxera, by the way. And we never changed that until more recent. And I'll jump a little bit in the history, but Carmenere, which is one of the 6 varietals of Bordeaux, was on them. We had no idea. We used to call everything that didn't look too much like Cabernet, we used to call it Merlot, mostly for the American market because nobody really cared. And our Merlot was very different. I mean, it was, very soft and mellifluous and sensuous. And so little by little, and by the way, it didn't look like Merlot either. Right? And it didn't ripen like Merlot, so we just maybe it isn't Merlot, So I remember when in 1990, I go back to Chile. By the way, it is true that I ran Conchitoro. I was the principal stockholder of Conchitoro from about 1960 until Allende took over Chile. And Conchitoro, the reason why I got in, by the way, I always wish I could say I had the vocation of going in the wine business or whatever. But the truth is that I was in the fishing business and I was 34 years old and I had taken over a company that my father had left because he had gone to Europe. And we were struggling along and this stockbroker came and said, look, there's a group of us trying to buy this sleepy little company which is in the market at less than its bulk wine inventory is worth. So we want to buy the company, liquidate the inventory, and keep all these beautiful properties that it has. That was Conchitoro. And I said, I don't have any money, we'll lend you the money, okay, let's do it, we did it. And after a few months trying to get that old management to change their way of thinking and going with our plan of selling the bulk wine, they, because they were older than me, decided we can't do that with this old management. They're all over 50. Me, I was 34, I was really old. So they said one of us has to jump in here. And they asked me to jump in and run Conchitoro. And I had never run a vineyard. I had hardly ever seen vineyards. Drank a little bit. But so I took over with that intention. And after about 6 months, I really discovered a potential in that business, and it certainly smelled much better than my fish business, but it became very attractive to me. And I saw the potential. Chile at that time didn't export wines. I saw the potential in exports. I had studied in college here, and I knew that there was some emerging interest in non-French wines, which was prevalent. So I took over and we ran the company, but after about 6 months, I fell in love with the wine business really, and here I am still. And I convinced our investors to stick with us. We did, we ran the company until 1971 when Allende took over, and he took over my company without any ceremony. He just put in what is called an interventor, which is basically somebody who the government appoints to run your company while your labor strife is resolved. Then that, of course, assumes 2 things. One is that your company is of primal social importance. So Conchitoro Wine Company in Chile was declared of primal social importance, which is a good thing, I guess. But the next step was to declare all of my unions, which reported to the communist labor union heads, they struck me. We had a great relationship, and we had been very, very sort of forward in our social strategies, and had a great relationship. But they were not free either. They had to do what they commanded. So they struck. 3 days later, I had an interventor sitting here at my desk, and there I sit, like a Queen of England, with a great big desk and nothing to do at all. And
he runs the company. He appoints a huge amount, 40 to be exact, very high-end manager, salary type people, and they were mostly communist agitators that had to go to other industries to do the same thing he was doing for me. They were on my payroll. There was 600% inflation at that time in the country, which means really that 600% inflation is almost like your prices go up every month. Your costs go up, but your prices cannot be increased because there's a decree of fixed price. So after very, very little, the company loses its total. First of all, its cash flow goes to the devil in a minute, but it doesn't matter because the government has a bank, the Central Bank of Chile, which is like the old federal bank here in America, very old, was run by the government. So my interventor would just call, I need, somebody $1 million today. That was it. So the company keeps running, losing a huge amount of money. Its net equity goes to zero and less than zero in less than 6 months. As, by the way, I would say 40% of Chile, this happened. And then, all of a sudden, by the way, at that time, I had developed the export business for Chile. And I had a relationship with Sealer that we represented my wines in certain countries, not in America. So, Edgar Brockman, whom I had asked, would you please be my importer in the United States? He said, only if you let us invest in Conchitoro. I said, okay, we'll negotiate a lot. So we got to a price, it was a few, $8 million or something at that time, which was huge. And they were doing their due diligence in Chile with 4 or 5 executives of Seagram the day that Allende was elected. Allende was a complete freak, by the way, which we owe, because Allende did not have a majority. The reason why he was elected was the brilliance of Mr. Kissinger. If you ever heard of that name, he is the culprit. And the brilliant CIA actions. They sort of mimicked a secondary coup, and they tried to kidnap the head of the army, and in that kidnapping, the head of the army got killed. He was a very beloved person in Chile. It was a holy mess created by Kissinger. Okay, so that's why we lost the country, by the way, to the communists. And there's no Kissinger friends here, but I don't mind. I'm glad about this discussion. So anyway, Edgar calls me the next day and says, look, Richard, that's my name. If, we can't invest in Chile. Chile is out of the question now for American investment. And if you need a job, let me know. I said, thanks, Edgar, I don't need a job. 3 days later, I need a job. So he calls me, and I call him, and he says, let's go to Argentina and start something. So I go to Argentina, Mendoza, we start something. And we think we're going to start something, but to my strange fortune, Edgar calls me 3 or 4 days later, when I'm in Mendoza, and says, guess what? Our president had just died, the president of the Argentine companies. Would you take over? And they had big things in Argentina, and among which were 3 wineries, Bianchi, Suter, and I don't remember just the Yeah. Well, anyway, we were very active in wines and stuff. So I took over Seagram's wine business and every business. And Argentina at that time, this has nothing to do with wine culture. Argentina at that time was also undergoing a very ferocious political and social upheaval. And they were the principal tool of the terrorists at that time was kidnapping and ransom. And Hiram Walker, which was my competitor and good friend, by the way, he got himself kidnapped and 20 days later killed. So by then, I was invited to New York, by the way, to become the first president of international business for Seagram. And so I said, okay, we'll go. And that's how we came to the United States. And I convinced Seagram at that time, instead of dividing the company into national and international, which was going to happen and did happen, we divided into wines and spirits. Because at that time, wine was not really, for example, distributors did not have wine sales groups. The same people that were selling whiskey would try to sell wine, and it just wasn't working. So anyway, we divided the company, and then we sort of coerced, I would say, but we convinced, that's a better word, the distributors to start their wine business. And I ran the international wine business for Seagram, and in that capacity, I was able to get to know about 15 different countries where we had wineries, among which was Argentina and Brazil, and Chile, of course. So anyway, I'm going back to the aesthetics of wine and how it goes into America, and trying to answer America, by the way, because this talk is about wines of America. South America is America also. And answering the question, do we make similar quality or as quality wines in South or in North America, in Napa or in South America, or for that matter in America or Europe? And talking then about quality, the first thing we have to do is define what is quality. And in that context, I'm going to share with you a very impressive conversation, not probably a seminar, I think it was maybe here, no, it was before the CIA, where Warren Winiarski and Peter Sichel, the head of Palmer, not Peter Sichel of Blue Nun, had the talk. The seminar was based, what is quality? And Warren gave an American view, which he doesn't necessarily believe in, but it was definitely a well-presented American view of quality, and Peter gave the European view of quality. And I was amazed at how absolutely different they are. In America, quality is an absolute, like goodness, like God sort of, it's up there somewhere. And nobody really knows what it is, but there are a few self-appointed apostles that do know, you see. And they grade everything according to how close to that epitome of whatever it is quality. And they know every varietal from every world, and they can place it on that mysterious scale. What is quality? And that is supposed to, in some sort of way, indicate the amount of pleasure that you're going to get from that bottle of wine. Mysterious concept of the New World. On the other hand, the European concept was very different. Quality for Peter Sichel was conforming to a standard that had been developed through the ages for each specific type. Typicity was the most important concept of quality. And every wine had to be conforming, had to be measured in terms of quality, or as how it conformed to that specific standard. So a Bordeaux wine, of course, is different from everything else, and you couldn't possibly compare them. So, keeping that in mind, we have to define for ourselves what is quality. The American concept has somehow prevailed. And in that question, do you produce wines, as of equal quality as Europe or as Napa? The answer is, from a European point of view, definitely. From an American point of view, depends who is grading at that particular moment. But ultimately, quality is something that is central. And like everything is central, our senses are all different. We're a composite of senses, and for all of us, everything is different. Wines, not to be separated from every other sensual experience. So, keeping that in mind, American culture, of course, is hugely prevailing. And this tradition, because wine is, let's face it, it's a European tradition, still is, very much so. But, and it was in South America. However, America has a tremendous power of cultural infiltration. And it takes traditions, it studies them, it looks at them, it shakes them up to see if they have merit, if they're worth keeping or not, and if they're not, they drop it. And the influence of America is, think of American music, rock and American jazz and everything, it's prevailed all over the world. Think of American fashion. Where on earth do people not go around with jeans, for example, or the city baseball cap? I mean, these are American things, and they prevail. And the fashion in general. Food, it's amazing that in the cradle of great cuisine, which is France, how American culture has influenced. I remember being representing the Wine Institute, and we were members of a group going to the Expo. I don't remember when. I was with Francisco. And the most interesting thing by far in Expo that year was the California Cafe, which we took over and which served pretty much Alice Waters kind of food, fresh. And it was just, I mean, it took over the wine at Expo, that particular. But I mentioned that as an anecdote, but the truth is that American cuisine has prevailed all over. It used to be France with its butter and all that. No more. So anyway, American culture has already infiltrated wine in a powerful, powerful way. For example, denominating wines by its varietal content is a New World concept. In Europe, it always was, except for very, very few exceptions, it always was the place, Bordeaux, or Burgundy, or Chianti, or Piedmont. And they don't tell you what varietals are in it. For some reason, in America, and when I say America, it's all America, we started using varietals sort of as flavors in an ice cream shop. Oh, I want a Pinot Noir, I want a Cabernet, I want a Merlot. I like Sauvignon Blanc. Which is really, meaningless, because there's nothing as different as a Cabernet from Napa and a Cabernet from Fresno. So trying to indicate what is in a bottle by giving the component of the grapes that go into it is false. You have to add where it comes from, at least up until now. Now we can manipulate it enough so that probably we can just say. But anyway, varietal denomination is a New World concept. As is, by the way, brands. In the old world, brands didn't exist. Growers existed, and maybe some negociants existed. But they sold appellations. Ratings. When the numerical ratings, wine criticism has been, tremendously important all through history. Because there's always been a mass of wines offered to massive consumers, and there has to be filtering. But reducing that critique to a numerical rating was considered by the whole world the worst aberration ever happened to wine. And they all, shook with laughter at first. Little by little, they gave in, they gave in. And now, perhaps now a little less, but 10 years ago, everybody was just trying to get good ratings from those people that had the influence at the moment. And this was very nefarious in wine, because there's a uniform, every winemaker, whether explicitly told or not, is expected to get good ratings. And they know how. You know, I mean, the tasting of wines in the context that they taste, the ratings, definitely can be affected by winemaking. So anyway, ratings. And like that, we're now, one wants to think, so what's going to happen next, you know? Because when Americans take over, all Americans take over this culture, what are we going to do? Well, I don't know, but whoever guesses this is going to be very successful. One of the things that I would guess is that our traditional European packaging and all of the ceremony and paraphernalia that goes with wine is going to have a difficult time surviving the American way of living. This, you know, different glasses for different wines, the special screw opener, whatever it's called, and these uncomfortable bottles that hardly fit the refrigerator, if they do. All these things, will they stand the tradition? I mean, will they stand the test of American pragmatism? Who knows? Who knows? Maybe yes, maybe no. But it's an interesting concept. And like that, we've already started, you know, with the school campuses, an American acceptance, American invention. So, what's going to happen to wine? I don't know. But America and American wines are playing a very, very major role in that. Perhaps the most important role that America played in the European culture is in flavor and winemaking. When we first started, when I first started in the business, it was absolutely and totally normal to find sediment in bottles. And you know, the French would come in with their funny accent, and say to us, oh, this is, you know, part of whatever, and it's very good, and just decant the bottle a little bit. Come on, Americans, don't give me all ideas. Clean it up, man. And we did. And today, there's no sediment in wine, in spite of all of it. It started with the white wines, you know, and it started with our invention, basically, of the stainless steel tanks. And but it's gone now to red wines. And another very important thing is that, you know, aging, quote unquote. And everybody says, oh, will this wine age? You know, who the hell cares? We drink all our wine right away. I mean, 99.9% of the wine is drunk when it's released or within a year. But we talk about ageability, and we go to these tastings and taste all these things. And the best thing you could say about it, it's still alive, you know? Okay, so anyway, I don't know why I'm talking about this. So I told you how we discovered Carmenere. Carmenere in Chile is considered, I mean, we've explored it as a solo, as a solo varietal, and it has a lot of very interesting characteristics. Some, like the Cabernet Franc, perhaps, it's very soft, it has little tannin and low in acidity, so it's very pleasant. But we believe it's mostly going to be a marvelous blending wine. And we are not, as we like to say, the only ones that have it. It's called Petit Vidour in other countries, and Washington State has an enormous amount, by the way, it's great. So, but that's going to be a variety that's going to come, and it's going to influence American wines. And of course, we have Malbec in Argentina, which has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, and we have a lot of it in Chile, and there's a lot in France as well. But for some mysterious, magical, wonderful reason, it is in Argentina, where it yields a very unique kind of wine. I mean, a solo Malbec from France is not as good, or from Washington State, or even from Napa. We have Malbec. So the combination soil varietal does something very special in Argentina. But I still have an answer, though. In the 1990s, mostly in Chile, but I think in the entire southern part, these three wine cultures, Uruguay, Argentina, and Chile, which are the non-rum cultures of Latin America, the countries that really have a wine tradition much older than anything we have here, by the way. Because in the 1850s, people would never sit down for lunch in Argentina or Chile, I'm pretty sure or Uruguay, without a glass of wine. That's understandable. It wasn't so in America, and it certainly wasn't in Mexico. And at that time, we in Chile start trying to make wines of a more aesthetic and more diverse. Because at first it was, let's get those ratings, so let's make those wines the way those guys like it, you know, big, powerful, dry, right? And little by little, we tried to start diversifying. In 1990, I was with Bob Mondavi, by the way, in Chile. And we noticed, and Bob brought this up, everybody here is making their wines in the Central Valley of Chile, which is very, very wonderful, very vigorous, and very high yielding. So we looked around and I found a property in Casablanca. Casablanca had not been planted to grapes at all. There was no grapes in Casablanca. But Casablanca, which is about, I would say an hour right now from Santiago, had a climate which is very highly influenced, like the way here, by the Pacific Ocean. And we knew that we were going to get much, much lower yields, but we put our bet on going for fine wines, by which I mean wines which had a longer growing season and much sort of narrower yields and climate and much more demanding in viticulture. And so we started planting in Casablanca. And today, of course, the better Chilean wines all come from regions other than the Central Valley of Chile. Central Valley of Chile is very good but it's warm. So, and it's a great place to grow Carmenere, by the way, and Cabernet. But the Sauvignon Blancs and the Pinot Noir, the Chardonnay, are beginning to be grown in the coastal areas like Casablanca. And I would say that we are inventing in Chile and in Argentina new areas and new appellations. In Argentina, I visited recently Nvwl in Patagonia, and they're growing a beautiful Pinot Noir there. And because we call them, you know, like Malbec in Argentina, we'll probably, 100 years from now, will probably be a different clone, a different everything. And maybe it's going to be something else. It's going to be Argentine Malbec. Fortunately, my time is up. Let me see if... Okay, so I'm going to answer the question. Do we make wines of equal quality? Absolutely. Yes. Definitely. By that I mean we make wines which have the basic characteristics that people look for in grape wines. Great concentration, flavors that are unique, a balance, harmony, pleasant, beautiful wines, but hopefully different. And that difference is going to be the future. I mean, we have come to a point in wine culture in general of uniformity, which has been provoked a little bit by our dependence on gravings. Gravings made in big tastings where the wines have to stand out for some reason, you know, the drums. And where a Mahler could not exist, you know, it had to be very band, you know, the trumpets and the drums. I think that we're going to come to a place now where people are looking for more diversity. Latin America has an enormous number of areas, Argentina and Chile, and by the way, Peru. Peru's wine industry is situated right now in the coast, a very sandy area. We went to explore last year, 2 years ago, with our Montes, and we explored a lot and found wonderful areas for wine, which are high up in the Andes. And we have a property now in the Sacred Valley, which is where Machu Picchu is. And we started taking wines there, and Peru and Chile have fought their wars. So as soon as they found out Chileans are coming to Machu Picchu to plant wines, we got kicked out without any ceremony whatsoever. So, to end, may I just suggest two things to you today. The first is when you taste, you can put your palate in an appreciative mode, in a learning mode, or where it tends to go when you have 10 glasses is into a competitive and comparative mode. Oh, this wine is a little more this and this, yeah, but you don't enjoy them and you don't get to know them. Change them. Go into each wine is a personality that's trying to express something to you. Listen to it. Don't compare, because you're comparing very, very different things today. And the other thing that I recommend highly is this. If you have only one trip in your life to make, go to Europe. Get rid of that part. But 2, 3, 4, 5 times. I have friends that have gone 60 times to Europe and never to South America. And South America is one of the most wonderful places in the world. Machu Picchu and Buenos Aires, Patagonia, Easter Island, Atacama Desert. It's just amazing. Culturally, naturally, and physically. So, go to South America. Thank you very much.
Makes a very good point that obviously we have this amazing diversity of wines we're going to be tasting now, and I think he brings in a very important point about not comparing, not competitive, seeing each one and really talking about its site, its origin. And so we'd like to first of all start really with the second wine after this sparkling wine from Brazil. I wanted to try this very unique white wine from Argentina. The grape is called Torrontés. And it's really one of the unique, the way we're rediscovering varieties, as we mentioned, Carmenère in Chile, Malbec in Argentina, Tanat in Uruguay, amongst others. And of course in California, it's Nvwl, or Petit Syrah, or Charbonneau. Torrontés is really one of these unique varieties, and we know it has European origin, but it really came out and developed as its own, as a natural crossing in Argentina, where the Altiplano between Argentina, Peru, and Bolivia. And we'll talk more in detail about its origin, but I didn't want the wines to get too warm. It's an aromatic variety. It's one of those beautiful, unique, cherishable, sort of something that's really unique about Argentina. Of course, we know about Malbec, and that's what we'll be talking about next. So it's an honor for me to introduce our two panelists who are going to talk about Argentina. We have Enrique Herrero, who was born in Mendoza. Mendoza produces maybe 70% of all the wines of Argentina, maybe 80 even. He spent his childhood in a vineyard in the hometown of San Rafael, and he got a BS in agronomy in 1988 at the University Nacional de Cuyo in Mendoza. He moved to California in 97 to get a master's degree in agronomy and in agricultural economics at UC Davis as well. And in 2003 he joined what was then called Limon Coppola Winery, and was their viticulturalist. In 2005 he decided to go back to Argentina, and he worked as a vineyard manager for a new project called Finca de Cerro, which I had the honor to visit, an incredible project in Agrelo, I believe. Then in 2008 he was asked to come back and relaunch really the new Inglenook property and relook at all the vineyards. So he's a man that knows both Argentina and Napa Valley very well. And then to my right, we have the pleasure to introduce Jose Manuel Ortega, who by chance, I had a wonderful dinner at his winery about a couple of months ago. He has one of those beautiful wineries in the Valle de Uco. If you actually look at the Hugh Johnson and Jens Stromson World Atlas, the first picture at the beginning of the atlas is his winery. Very modernist, an incredible building, in the Valle de Uco, and has an amazing restaurant there. And his wife is a great chef and has a great restaurant as well in Mendoza. He both has wineries in Spain, his country of origin, in the Ribera del Duero, working with Tempranillo and Tinto Fino. He has this winery in the Valle de Uco, which is one of the highest quality and the most progressive new region in Mendoza, and he also owns a winery as well in Chile. So he'll have a very interesting perspective to talk about all three of those, and we'll be tasting his Aufournier Alpha Cruz blend, which is a Tempranillo Malbec blend. So thank you for being here. By chance, he happened to be in Sonoma yesterday with the U.S. Ambassador to Argentina and the delegation. I told him, why don't you come over for an hour or two, and he has a plane to catch this afternoon. So it's an honor to have him here. So Enrique, why don't you start the presentation? And please, Nvwl, if at any time you want to chime in. And then we're going to start also tasting the wine. So please start the Torrontés, and then start the first Malbec as well, which is from Colomé. Both of these wines are from a very high altitude vineyard. Probably the highest altitude, at the moment, the highest altitude vineyard in the world. They are starting to plant vineyards maybe higher in Bolivia or Peru, but as a fine wine producer, this is a project that was purchased by Donald Hess of Hess Vineyard here, the Swiss businessman, and most Swiss people like mountains and altitude, and it's been an incredible project. I can talk more about it later, but I wanted to try the Torrontés from the Calchaquí Valley there in Colomé, and then a pure Malbec from that area. Then we'll be tasting and contrasting two blends from Mendoza, Malbec blend with Bonarda and Tempranillo, and then we'll be finishing with a 100% Malbec from the Valle de Uco. So that'll be the progression of everything. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Thank you very much for having me here. And before I start, I would like to thank Agustin for your enlightening presentation. But I would like to warn young people here that we are a good way to talk about wine critics, and the snobism of wine is something that you can afford only when you retire. Okay, let's go to the topic. I'm here to talk about wines of Argentina. And as it was mentioned before, and in a much ornamental way by Agustin, South America is a huge area for, it's big in terms of acres and potential for diversity. And Argentina is one example of that. So it has a very long development from south to north. And although in the central part of the country we have probably 90% of the acreage planted of grapes, there are new regions, and not that new also, that make part of our wine industry with very competitive wines, like the northern part of the country as well as the southern part in Patagonia. So it's gone from 22 degrees of latitude to probably 42 in the Patagonia region. As Agustin mentioned before, the history of wine in Argentina is pretty tied to the Chilean history of wine. Actually, the first wines that were introduced in Argentina in 1500, they came from Chile. And they were not planted in Mendoza, but in the northern region of Argentina called now Santiago del Estero. Don't confuse with Santiago de Chile, is much more smaller city and less prosperous. But anyway, there was the first commercial vineyard that was planted. But soon after that, vineyards were spread out all over the central part of Argentina, Mendoza, where I come from. So there is a census from almost 1740 that counted that for 120 vineyards already at that time. It was only in the middle part of the 19th century that things got more, I would say, directed to quality and to the improvement of the science behind winemaking and wine growing. And it was also from Chile that a French agronomist, Michel Pouillet, came to Argentina, and he was the first one that brought Malbec into the region. And that We have to clarify what before the phylloxera outbreak in France. Then there were two main historical facts that shaped Argentina's wine industry. First was the constitutional organization of the country with the development of the railroad that made it possible to, or made it easier to transport wine around. And with that, the first school of enology, I would say, it was called Quinta Agronómica in Mendoza, that taught agriculture, wine growing, and wine making. That was at the end of the 20th century. And the other fact was the huge influx of immigration. So if you want to visit Italy south of the equator, you have to go to Argentina. We've got a huge influence from Italian immigrants at the end of the 19th century, the second decade of the 20th century, and then in the 1940s. So as Agustin mentioned, there are many last names from Italian origin that are linked to what was the big wine industry in the first part of the 20th century. Like Catina, for instance, that is from the market in Italy. Let's see some numbers to have more or less an appreciation of the size of the wine industry. So I translated everything in acres because we understand here acres better than hectares. So let's focus on that bottom line of that chart. And you will see that already in 1936, we in Argentina had about more than 370,000 acres of planted acres. And the trend was upward until the end of the 70s. And that business model was based, as it was mentioned before by Gilles, in a very solid, robust domestic market. So I grew up when I was 6 years old, and I had wine at dinner. Very low quality wine, you know, with sparkling water, a little bit of wine, and that it was a consumption wine. It was a commodity. It's like bread for Argentina. Bread and wine go together. That was a very solid and valid model until beer and soda hit into the market. I remember, I'm 54, when Coca-Cola was not sold in Mendoza because there were regulations. So when that happened, the consumer preference shifted to something else, soft drink, beer, and we had what we call overproduction, and it was not overproduction, it was a decrease in demand of wine, especially this low quality wine that was massively sold. So that's why in the bottom graph, you can see that decrease in planted acres until, well, the last one there is 2011 with about 500,000 acres planted. But it got almost to 800 million, they say 800,000, sorry. Almost 800,000 acres in Argentina, which is pretty much the current size of the acreage in California. So more numbers. Currently Argentina grows about 500,000 acres of grapes. It's number 9 in the world in terms of acreage. Produces about 15 million hectoliters, so for use 396 millions of gallons. So in production is number 5 in the world. And the consumption is high, it's number 8 in the world by total volume consumed, not per person. Because statistics per person is very shady, because the first one that you see in any statistic is the Vatican State, for instance. I don't know, although the Pope is Argentina, I don't think that he drinks that much. But if you see in the bottom to your right, you will see that consumption in Argentina is 10 million hectoliters. So it's pretty much still, although Argentina opened its wine to the world, it's still a high proportion of wine is still consumed domestically. So 70% of the wine is consumed domestically. What is exported? Where does it go? Well, the American market is the dream of every winery in the world. Canada, Brazil, and the UK. We say that among those countries, they concentrate pretty much 70% of the Argentine exports. Okay, leave markets aside and go to how is the areas of how are the areas where we grow grapes. And Jim asked me to make a parallel between what we know here in California and what we have in Argentina. So the best thing I wanted to touch is on a very big picture. And here we have, I don't know how do you want to call it, the American continent or the Americas. For you, South America and North America are different continents. I have that polemic discussion at home because I have an American son. That's for him, South America is a different continent. I was told that everything is one continent. But in any case, the reason I put this here is for you to draw a parallelism between what we have in South America and here in North America. So, two distinctive climate patterns are illustrated here in this picture. The continental and the Mediterranean type of climate. Mediterranean is what we have here depicted on the right hand of the slide, and is characterized by winter rains, very distinctive seasons. Summer is very different from winter. Summers are cool but not cold, and difference in temperature between summer and winter are less extreme than in continental type of climate that are characteristic of the areas where we grow grapes in Argentina, that are very similar to what we see here in North America when you go to the east part of Oregon or east part of Washington. In fact, Washington is trying very successfully to replicate some of the characteristic of the Argentine wine industry by increasing the Malbec production. So, are areas that are away from any large body of water. So we have the Andes that separate us from the Pacific Ocean. So Chile is a replica of California in the way that the weather plays their role. The only thing is that in January they're in summer, but for the rest is very similar. Argentina, on the contrary, is more like if you were to go to the east side of the Sierra Nevada. So cold winters, some snowfall in the winter, major temperature swings. The winters are mostly dry and cold. We have very low precipitation that, although it's very low, is more concentrated during the spring and the fall. So more specifically, I draw this parallel between different areas of Argentina and Napa, specifically Rutherford, with some climatic parameters. So, few things to focus here. Rainfall here is much more abundant. So that's why relative humidity, the third to the last column, is much higher in Napa than in any wine growing region in Argentina. The year mean temperature is more or less the same, but as I said, with larger swings between winter and summer in South America or in the continental part of South America than here in Napa. The average high during the season is larger there, is warmer. The latitudes, well, we have, as I said, the huge spread of latitudes from the north part of the country at 25 degrees to Patagonia, 40 degrees of latitude. And the elevation, that is interesting because the continental wine growing regions of South America are usually located at very high elevation. You compare, these are feet, and here in Rutherford we're about 200 feet of elevation, while in Argentina the lowest valleys are at 700. One of the challenges that we have, as I said, is summer rainfalls that are not abundant enough to irrigate like it happens, or to provide water to the vines like it happens in Bordeaux, but they are enough to cause some problems. One of them is hailstorms. I grew up in a vineyard that we owned for 40 years. It was a small vineyard. We were there because the house was very beautiful, but we harvested twice. 14 years. It gives you an idea of how bad can be hailstorms in Argentina, probably. Because I can second me on that view. So that is pretty much about the climate condition. When we go to soils, it's very diverse, and especially because most of the wine growing regions are in the Andes foothills. It's like having a huge Rutherford bench that goes for thousands of kilometers. So most of those soils are the result of alluvial movement, and as such, they are very diverse. So it's very difficult to put everything in one box. But I could say that they bear some common characteristics. They can go from very shallow to deeper soils depending on where you are. And usually when you have shallow soils, it's because there is a presence of gravel strata, very shallow in the soil, like is depicted here in one of the pictures. Usually coarser texture, sand, but there are some areas where you have clay soils as well. So, one characteristic is that, I don't know how familiar you are with some concept of microclimate, but there is a concept of evapotranspiration, which is how much water a crop consumes. So we are in an area where that consumption of water from crops is higher than the precipitation. So that equals irrigation. And wherever you have irrigation, you sooner or later end up with, I will correct myself, whenever you have irrigation in a place where your precipitation is smaller than the water consumption, you will end up with salinization sooner or later. And that is a problem and a limiting factor that we have, especially in Mendoza. We irrigate our vineyards with water that runs out of snow melting from the Andes. We only cultivate 3% of the province area, so it's very dry. It's like being in Nevada. So those streams of water that come from the mountain, they load some salt on the way down, and that's why we start adding salt to our soil by irrigating. Okay, some viticultural practices. What is similar to here, what is different from here. So most of our vine training is what we here we call a PSP. And I have to make a distinction between the viticulture in Argentina before the late 80s and 1990s, or before the beginning of the 1990s, and after that. Is, let's say, the old viticulture and the new one. And the new one came with the opening of the Argentine economy to foreign investment and to the export market. And with that, we got a viticulture that pretty much is very similar to what we have here in terms of incorporation of drip irrigation, grafted vines. But traditional viticulture was a little bit different, even in terms of vine training. So one characteristic thing from that old viticulture is what we call parral. It's like a pergola. It was a way to train vines in a very high fashion. So it was like a roof. The canopy was placed horizontally instead of vertically. And there were two reasons for that. One is that in Argentina, as a very continental climate that the wine growing region is the extremes between winter and summer sometimes means that you have late frost, so spring frost. And the best way to prevent damage is to have a very high trellis system where your food is hanging very high. The other reason is that some areas, because of the amount of radiation and heat unit that they have, they are areas prone to high vigor. And to accommodate that high vigor, also one way to do it is to train the vines higher and with more space between vines. The new viticulture was a little bit different. The VSP existed already in Mendoza for low vigor areas. It was what we call espaldero, but it was much smaller. The new version of our espaldero or the VSP is more similar to what sometimes you see here in California, and it tried to accommodate potential mechanization and a more rational way to manage the vineyard. Irrigation, again, the old viticulture, flood irrigation or furrow irrigation, very common. The new viticulture was more into drip irrigation. Still, I would say it's a small proportion of the vineyards that are drip irrigated, probably, I don't know, 30%, 40%. But irrigation is needed, otherwise you don't grow anything. In terms of pruning, the traditional way to prune in Argentina was doing what here is called cane pruning, but actually there is all beyond, because it was the proposal of that type of pruning. And now it's shifting more towards cordon pruning, as we have here in California, the Napa Valley. I mentioned hail, I mentioned my frustrated childhood in a vineyard that we harvested only twice in 14 years. So hail is a must. For any reasonable investment in grapes area, you have to assure that at least you will have some of the area protected by natives. And that implies one more aspect of management. To lift it, to put it down, is it's an additional need that you have there in the vineyard. At the bottom on the right is a vineyard after a hail damage. So you can see the canopy practically destroyed by that was on December 27th. I remember at Finca de Cero we had that hailstorm there of damage on the vineyard. The other aspect that could be of interest of you is that most of the Argentine viticulture is planted on root vines, not grafted. We do not graft, or most of the vineyards are not grafted. Phylloxera is present. So the question is, nobody understands why phylloxera is not a problem. Why it's not wiping out vineyards. So there are some hypotheses to that. One is that furrow irrigation creates an environment for phylloxera not to prosper. The other is that because of colder winters, phylloxera is not able to prosper that much. When Argentina adopted more massively the drip irrigation, at the same time we used grafted vines. But down the road, after 10 years, many people started planting on own roots, even when they had drip irrigation. So it's to be seen if the fact that we no longer do furrow irrigation, but we have own-rooted vines in drip irrigation, will cause any problem for phylloxera. So far, it doesn't seem to be any problem. And the last hypothesis that probably the biotypes of phylloxera that are present in Argentina in some way are different from those in France or here in California, and they are less virulent. But in any case, phylloxera exists, and like it was mentioned in Chile that they don't have it, they do have it, but doesn't seem to be true. So, few words about the regions. I said that the region, central region of Argentina, Cuyo, holds about 95% of the linear acreage. What is going on in the other ones? The northern region is characterized by high altitude. They have an emblematic varietal, which is the first wine, the second white wine that we have, Torrontés. And the most well-known valley is called Cafayate. I guess this wine is not coming from Cafayate, but from Colomé. I rushed through this because
we can go into the wine now. So everybody's tried the first white wine, the Torrontés from Colomé. This is from very high altitude. Let's go back to that map, Enrique, if we could. Where really what's unique about the altitude is, of course, is this thermal difference, the difference between day and night temperature. And we're talking here 7,000, 8,000 feet. This is very high desert. Normally you would never be able to grow anything in North America. But where we are at this latitude, of course the influence of sunlight and UV on the ripening too of Malbec is very unique. So try the Torrontés Colomé, it's very aromatic. Do you have a slide that tells us the history of Torrontés, Enrique?
yes.
And we could do that, and then we'll go back to, then we'll go to Valle de Uco and taste those wines. Has anybody had a Torrontés before here?
Sure.
You didn't have? Yeah, it's interesting because the longer I've been going to Argentina, I said this is unique, and in Argentina it's actually not seen with great respect. It's seen, because a lot of it is made sort of off-dry. What do you think? You produce a Colomé, Nvwl?
Torrontés.
I mean, you produce a Torrontés.
Yeah, we produce a Torrontés in Cafayate in Santa Ana. But our style of Torrontés is quite refined. It's aromatic components of the best variety, but it's quite dry in the mouth, so we wanted to make it more mainstream variety, and it's worked out very well in abroad, as you were saying. I mean, not as well actually as Malbec, but reasonably well. And it's a lovely variety. I always say it's a Bustaminer at a third of the price.
It has the words aromatic. It's a tiny production. Salta is only what, maybe 4% of the production of all of Argentina?
3%.
So this is 3%, so it's a very, very small production.
And not all Salta is Torrontés. They have also Malbec and other varieties. Just few anecdotal comments about Torrontés. It was discovered that it was a natural crossing between what we call here Chica in Argentina, which is Mission, and Muscat of Alexandria. And I have to mention that because my wife was part of the research team that found this parentage. And again, very old vineyard. That's the other characteristic of Salta region. Very, very old vineyards in that region. I guess the oldest vineyard in Argentina is that Colomé.
Maybe let's go to the map. Do you have the Valle de Uco?
Yes. Here. So
That's Patagonia.
here. So here is what we call Cuyo as a region is 3 provinces of Argentina on the central west part of Argentina. So if you focus, let me take this mode.
We have a detailed
Can
map
you
in
see
your handout too.
Can you see my cursor there? So, okay. So this area here, leading to the west of the Mendoza province, southwest of the Mendoza province, is what is called Valle de Uco. And it has many different places, and in terms of altitude that can go from, I don't know, 1,200 meters to 1,500 meters. Tupungato is the most well-known area for the altitude, and that is altitude because by the needs of temperature patterns has a huge influence on flavors of Malbec in this case. So, James, I don't know if you want to explain a little bit about Malbec.
Yeah, I think what I'd like, because unfortunately Jose Manuel has to go to catch a plane, so I think we'd like to taste everybody to taste wine 5. And maybe tell us about the Valle de Uco in general, your project with Nvwl, and then we'll go back after you have the Uco.
Okay, good morning, everyone. As you said, I'm Jose Ortega Funera, I'm the founder of the Funera Group. It's a pleasure, a total coincidence to be here, but this week has been coincident all over the place. On Thursday, I was exchanging emails with Steven Spurrier, who's a good friend, the godfather of my daughter, and I said, well, where are you, Steven? Oh, I'm just landing in San Francisco, and I was in San Francisco, staying at the same hotel, so he invited me to dinner, which was his 40th celebration of the fire, which is obviously so important for now. And then the same thing with Jill, and I said, listen, I want to have some friends that I need to visit some wineries in Napa, and I said, well, there's this seminar, so I'll join in. So every time I see a microphone, I jump. I'm really hungry child. But anyway, our project in Nvwl started 15 years ago. We were pioneers in that region as owning wineries. Usually vineyards in Nvwl have been there for centuries. And one of the reasons of that, of our decision to invest in Nvwl is the fact that there were all vineyards there. I have a different approach to wine than maybe Mr. O'Neill, which I respect tremendously, but we're never going to a new region. We have too much respect for generations and generations and generations of people who have been looking for places. So we will never invest in a place that doesn't have all wines. And that's my personal opinion, because I consider myself not smart enough to be a pioneer into a region where, for many centuries people have been probably trying, vines, and if they're not there, it's probably nothing to do. This is why, for example, in Chile we're in the Nvwl Valley, which is the oldest wine region in Chile. We make wines from 100, 120-year-old ungrafted vineyards. Uco Valley, the same thing. And then the only place where that rule didn't apply was in a part of Chile where we were investing, and there were no vineyards until very recently. But the city that was closer to our vineyard was called Viña del Mar. So the name of the city is called after vine. That means that probably at some point there were vines there. But Uco Valley is, in our opinion, the most magnificent wine region in Argentina. It's very high altitude, 3,600 feet of altitude, very unique weather, very unique soil conditions. We get 85, 90 degrees every day and 55 degrees at night in the summer. So when you taste our wine, you will see that freshness and acidity that 9-year-old wine. I'm not sure how the numbers, because the ones on the page are different from the ones that are numbered on the bottle. So mine is easy to see because it's not like massive. So it's by default, it's the only one that is not a massive one. So, and it's usually a bit older in color, in the sense that it's an 9-year-old wine. I have to, again, to disagree with Mr. Uneos on it. I am a big believer of aging of wines. I mean, I love wines that are great upon release, but I also love to wait for the wines. And I think, unfortunately, in this last decade, we've been going too much to drinking wines too fast. And unfortunately, also that has brought very unanimity on the style of wines, which is something that I abhor. And I didn't get to the wine business to make just what everyone else is making. So, in this particular case, for example, we're pioneers because we did a wine with 70% Tempranillo, which to all you may sound like a crazy thing to have Tempranillo in Argentina. But Tempranillo is a fifth largest grape variety by acreage, and it's a variety that is wonderful in areas like Nvwl, where it's very cold at night, and you can have that sort of early ripening and still maintain good acidity. If you taste our wine, our Afro-Fruits blend,
and it is wine number 6, I believe. Well, here was poured as wine number 6.
yes.
Tilt the glasses forward. This is a 2007. This is a much older wine. Another current release was releases in Argentina, 13 and 14. So make sure you tilt the glasses side by side, and you'll see the 5th. According to on this side, it was poured last. I'm not sure if you have it as the 5th or the 6th. Double check.
think it's the last one, you can see it from the color.
Here we go.
I think it's the last class, number 6. And as you can see it just from smelling it, it's a very delicate, it's a very velvety in the nose and also in the mouth. And you still have for a 9-year-old wine that acidity, that balance in the wine, which is something that we aim for. When we started 15 years ago, I've always been very sort of countercultural. I was a high school student in Mobile, Alabama, from Spain to Mobile. That's a bit of a change. I could tell you stories until this evening about my experience there. The first one wearing a wool vest, August 14th. It was like 115 degrees and 125 million% of humidity. And I was wearing a wool vest because my mother wanted me to look nice. My host family, so all day I was sweating like a pig, which didn't help on my ankles, but the vest was on. Anyway, from there I did my freshman year in Notre Dame. Then I ended up graduating from Wharton. I worked for Goldman Sachs in London. Then I worked for Great Arts, Banco Santander, Spanish bank, and then I quit everything and started my wine business. So I'm not like a lot of the the bankers that you know here that are like so wealthy that don't know what to do with their money and they end up investing in Napa. That's not me. When I left the banking business, I had some savings, but not enough. So I have to fight for every bottle. So if you ever buy a wine, you're putting food on the table for my 4 children. So that's your charity moment for the day. So think of that when you buy my wines. I always say that when I started the wine business, I started with liquidity at 5% interest. Now I have liquidity at 14% alcohol. Unfortunately, the same liquidity for my finances, but I love every minute of it. I'm very proud, to be here and to be associated with people like Mr. Menos, which are, I always say that in the wine business there are people like me and there are celebrities. And here at least we have some celebrities and then people. So I'm trying to make it shorter so we can have more time with the celebrities. But in any case, to be able to present our wine, a wine that is of age, and it's drinking so well, it makes me very proud, and it makes everything worthwhile. Because wine, in my opinion, is about legacy. It's not about money. It's not about business. It's about legacy. It's about producing something that when you are gone, these wines will outdo. And this is why, to me, aging of the wine is very critical for our business. Not on the sales side, but on the reason why I left a very promising banking career to do something. Because whether you know it or not, we only live once. And whatever we don't do in this life, we will not do in the next one. So my life was about producing wines that when I'm dead, hopefully, very, very long time from now. Even though I'm like 83 years old, I've been drinking good wine for so many years, I'm 48. So I recommend all of you that are younger than me to continue to drink very good wine. You're in the right place to do that. So that way you continue to do that, when you get to be 83 like me, then you look like very young. So in any case, also some technical things. The Nvwl is a very particular place, and I actually don't like, I think it's a mistake to talk about country wines. You don't do that in France or in Italy. We need to regionalize the Nvwl. So, I don't believe in an Argentinian wine because, for example, wines from the Nvwl are much more similar to wines from Ribera del Duero or Toro than from the east of Mendoza. So I think we need to sophisticate ourselves a little bit more and start thinking about sort of regions and not countries. The Nvwl, I said, with the extreme temperatures and the weather conditions and the soil conditions it's a very unique area. We have a huge growth, from the last 15 years. And it's been also a development not only on the wine side, but also on the tourist side, also on the restaurant side. Gio was mentioning my wife and the restaurant we own and the wine was selected best restaurant and wineries in the world. So that tells you the quality that we can get there. We started 3 years ago a very, very interesting, very unique program which we call Awful Near Wine Partners. What we did is we had some extra land and we split it into 2.5 to 7 acre properties. So we actually now allow wine lovers that never ever dreamt of owning their own vineyard and making their own wine. So for $200,000, you can actually own the vineyard. And, I know you have Napa Valley Reserve here, but in our case, you actually own the vineyard. And this is a very anthropological, powerful concept, because ownership of land is something that is embedded in ourselves. That's why communism will never work, because it goes against human nature. And human nature is about owning the land or place. So we've been very successful with it. We've sold 70% of the lots to people from every nationality. And apart from the business is the happiness that I create. Because all these people, which are some are wealthy, some are even more wealthier, but $200,000 and split investment in two is not $100,000, not that much money. But I made them the possibility of a dream. And that's the reality. And they never, before they heard about our program, they never even dreamt that they could own a vineyard and to have their own label, they could come to the wine and blend their own blend and then get it shipped to the US. So I think Mendoza and Argentina in general is a very progressive place. I mean, it's not, don't think of like backwards and we like step on like the grave with our feet and all that, which I do that to get relaxation, but not to make the wine. But it's a very progressive, very unique. I think you must come and visit. We're actually trying to work with United Airlines to have a direct flight from the West Coast to Buenos Aires, and I think that's going to happen. So whether it's at least from San Francisco or Los Angeles, it's about to be seen. But we were just in this tour with the U.S. ambassador in Argentina that I just did this week. The head of United Airlines Argentina was with us. We kept on pounding him every day. Every day we had a meeting with someone and that thing came out. So hopefully once we have that, we can actually not have to listen to our boring conversations, but to actually see yourself, which is the important part. And we get a lot of people that visit. A lot of Americans can visit us in Mendoza. We have the pressure of bills. So his team has been tremendous for showing Mendoza to the world. I hope they don't lose him to Uruguay now, because we need it in Argentina. By the way, I have to say it because I don't think it's proper that he says it because he works for Mr. Bucheroni, but another place that you must visit before you end your life here is to visit the property that they have built and they have done in Uruguay. It's one of the most amazing places, amazing endeavors that I've ever seen. I was just lucky enough to be invited to the inauguration also 2-3 months ago, and that's going to change also the Uruguayan sort of wine sector. So I take my hat off to people like that who are willing to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in a dream. Anyway, so I'm going to have to probably run in a few minutes. I don't know if you have any comments about the wine. I'll be curious. We're very humble enough to listen to people, see what they think. As I said, if you look at the other Argentinian wines and the tasting, they're a bit different, they're a bit more massive. Mainly, for example, the Cobos, which is Paul Hoff's wine. I guess his particular style of winemaking is like that, very sort of sweet, very big wines. And this is also the beauty of Argentina, that depending on where you are, depending on who you are as a winemaker, you can decide to do a totally different wine and still be from the country. So you compare our wine with the Ramare from Cobos, and they're both from Uruguay Valley, they're like night and day. So that's what wine is so lovely. This is not Coca-Cola. This is personality wines. And I always say that, just to finish this, that you are big wine consumers. What I ask from you is every time you open a bottle, every time you get the cork out, whether it's a cheap wine or the most expensive wine, just treat the wine with respect, because there's so much that goes into it, so much suffering, so much effort, and it's in hailstones. It's not a commercial product. Every wine bottle has a bit of the heart, a bit of the soul of the producers, of the winemakers, of the people out there. So let's always respect any bottle of wine, whether it's cheap or expensive. And with that, I thank you for being here on Saturday, and let's hope there's not too much traffic into San Francisco, which I always abhor. Let's see if I don't miss my flight, because then my wife is going to kill me. if anyone is interested, I'll leave some brochure on the wine program, and Jill has my email, so if anyone wants to have a question about those that are visiting the vineyard program, by all means, we can give you information. Thank you again.
So we had the Alpha Cruz, which is a blend, Tempranillo, Malbec, and yeah. So we had, can you hear me here? This on? Checking. Now. Okay, so we had the Tempranillo, Malbec, Cabernet blend, and what we wanted to contrast today in the tasting is to show you 100% Malbec. So the first red wine was 100% Malbec from Colomé, back in the north, and then in the middle, well, this was supposed to be in the middle, I'm not sure where yours is, we had this Alpha Cruz, which is blended with Tempranillo, and the second wine, that's for sure number 4, is the Stalba, Corte A. Corte means blend, Corte A because they make a Corte B and a Corte C, and it's the different percentages of Malbec with Bonarda and Cabernet. And maybe, Enrique, you want to talk a little bit about Bonarda, because Bonarda is the second most planted grape in Argentina. The most planted grape is Malbec, and maybe we can talk a little bit, I don't know if we cut you off on the history of Malbec, but Bonarda is a very unusual grape, so why don't you tell us something about Bonarda?
Few words on Bonarda, and the blend that we are trying here is some winemakers like that blend in order to make the meat palate of the Malbec a little bit more continuous. And normally when it's 100% Bonarda, there are some characteristic aromas that olives, it's being described as or it's being mentioned as a descriptor. As Gilles mentioned, it's the second varietal, along with Cabernet Sauvignon, but it used to be the second with much more acres of Bonarda than Cabernet in the past. You have to think that Malbec and all this internationalization of Argentina happened in the 90s. And even when that happened, Malbec was not considered an international varietal. Then, even I guess in the mid-90s, Cabernet Sauvignon was even larger acreage than Malbec. Bonarda was traditionally grown a lot in Argentina, and can you see here that there is the title of a research paper, Molecular Characterization of Bonarda. And again, I married a molecular biologist, and a team of UC Davis, the University in Argentina, and a French ampelographer. They, after doing some DNA testing, they concluded that Bonarda in Argentina is not Bonarda, it's not the Bonarda from the Piedmont in Italy, but it's Charbono or Corbeau. And I'm glad because Nvwl was very well known for its Bonarda in the past. So I'm glad that I've been working with Nvwl. But again, a variety that, again, like anyone, is very terroir dependent, but is finding a way to make very interesting wines as you go at higher altitudes and in the Uco Valley and the high areas of northern Mendoza as well. And it's a good blender for Malbec. It makes it a really good one.
So the Vistalba Cortea, the second red wine, so it's a blend of Malbec, about 60%, about 25% Bonarda, this grape that was historically grown as well in Napa Valley called Charbono. Has anybody had a Charbono? Okay, great. I think Nvwl used to be a grape producer. There's still probably about 50 acres left in Napa only.
Yeah, and 7 hectares in France.
So Foley makes a great one too. So is actually Nvwl making a new Charbono?
No, we're not making it.
You're not making it. That's an old label on that picture. Okay. And this winery is in an area called Luján de Cuyo. Maybe we can switch back to the map of Mendoza. Luján de Cuyo, so Mendoza is like Napa, it's a city but an area. And around the city historically, like in Santiago, that's where all the great estates were. And the best known sub-region outside Mendoza is called Luján de Cuyo. Cuyo is also the general name for the whole region of Argentina. And that's subdivided, as both Augusto Nunes and Jose Manuel Fournier said, we need to talk about regionality. Wine is about place. So within and on your maps that you have.
You see where I have my cursor there? Can you see that? That is what is what's called in the past Primera Zona. It was where viticulture in Mendoza started, and this is the county, I would say, of Luján de Cuyo and Maipú. And that is the area where Vistalba is sitting, and it's where this kind of wine comes from. It's about 900 to 1,000 meters of altitude, which is for most Mendoza city is about 800 meters. So just for you to have an idea that everything is high altitude there per se.
So Vistalba, and if you have your map to the hand, you'll see it. You'll see next to it, it actually says Vistalba Carlos Polenta, because this is a winery founded by Carlos Polenta, the Polenta family, back to this Italian immigration and the importance of that in viticulture. We talked about the Catena family. Unfortunately, we don't have any wines from them, but Laura Catena lives in San Francisco, and her father Nicholas was a professor at UC at Berkeley, and really one of the great pioneers, let's say, in the wine industry, great friends of Robert Mondavi. And the Polenta too, since 1902, Italian immigrants, they had a winery called Peñaflor, then a winery you may have heard of called Trapiche, which were the first ones to really launch single vineyard Malbec and really bring in consultants like Michel Rolland. One of the big importance for Argentina was the influence of outside influence, meaning investors, foreign investors, a lot of French and Italian in the 80s and 90s. Michel Rolland was one of them, who actually then invested and has this project in the Valle de Uco called Clos de los Siete, which makes very interesting wines. It's 7 different wineries, 7 different partners, from the Dassault family of the jet fighters to the Rothschilds to other producers from Bordeaux that have wineries. And he was very influential too with Arnaldo Echar, a very important winery up in Cafayate. So Carlos Polenta sold, his family sold, and he started this small winery called Vistalba. So Vistalba is actually the name of an appellation, and it's also the name of the winery, a bit like Stag's Leap Winery or Stag's Leap Wine Cellars in the Stag Leap district. So this is their Corte A. And this is a 2011 vintage too, so wine with a little bit more age to give you the idea of the aging potential like we highlighted with the 2007. And then the other sort of outside consultant that had a big influence on the Argentine wine industry was Paul Hobbs. He was brought in actually by Catena originally to develop Alamos and to actually work on Chardonnay. And he fell in love with Argentina and he started his own project called Viña Cobos, C-O-B-O-S. And that is the wine that you have next to the Au Fournier. As Jose Manuel said, a very different style. It's a single vineyard from the Valle de Uco. Very powerful, rich, just exactly, but it's a young wine, 2012, I believe. It gives you an idea of the richness and the opulence and the velvet texture and what made Malbec such the darling of the wine world recently in the last 10 years, because these are rich, powerful wines, but they're soft, approachable, and very generous. And of course, they go very well with the Argentinian beef. So that's the Bramare, single vineyard from a vineyard in the Valle de Uco. Anything you want to show?
No, just
take a break if you will.
yeah. To round up this diversity, I would say, is the main message if you want to keep something from this presentation about Argentina. I would second Agustin what he said, that we put so much emphasis in the varietals, and even in our property in Nvwl, probably 2 different varietals are more similar between them if they are close together than different varietals in different parts of the property. I think we have to start thinking and pay more attention to where those wines are grown rather than what is inside the bottle. Okay, thank you very much.
Everybody settled in? Ready for another round?
Yeah.
I wanted to make a little bit of an announcement about the luncheon. The luncheon was very courteously extended by the Quineas family at the family home. So when you get out of here, you turn right down Highway 49 and then left at either Pratt.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Well, I guess it's still the morning. That's the good news. And the only thing between us and a wonderful lunch is a great flight of wines from Uruguay and, of course, wonderful Chile. Chile, the most historical, most well-known, and most, let's say, classic and established wine country in South America. Uruguay, the most unknown, the smallest, the ones to discover. So I thought it would be great to contrast these two side by side today. If you don't mind, it's only 1 minute and 30 seconds. Visuals are so important because when we talk about place, we talk about site, soil, climate, as Enrique had a very good presentation in Argentina to give us the base of what makes a wine what it is, the concept of terroir or place. So soil, climate, altitude, topography, exposure, influenced by the Pacific Ocean on one side if you're Chile, the Andes Mountain, high desert in Argentina. What makes Uruguay unique is it's the only country in South America that has vineyards right on the Atlantic. So in your handout, you should have a map which shows you where Uruguay is. It's on the general map and it's also on this other detailed map. How many people have been to Uruguay here? Just heads up. Oh, a few people. That's good. So I thought I would show you visuals quickly, and then it's actually about Sauvignon Blanc. It's only 1 second, and I do apologize because you will have to see my face right at the beginning of this video. But at least it gives you an idea of olive trees. There's a lot of olive oil production, lots of Italian and Spanish immigrants, and then I have a quick presentation on Uruguay. But just so you get an idea of the topography and what Uruguay kind of looks like for people that haven't been to Uruguay. Hello, this is Gilles de Chambieu, Master Sommelier. During harvest in Bodega Garçon in Uruguay, spoke about the Bodega Garçon Sauvignon Blanc. What makes Bodega Garçon in Uruguay unique is it's the only vineyard in South America influenced by the Atlantic. The cooling breezes give a citrusy and aromatic flavor to Sauvignon Blanc. The quality of the sunlight and the rolling hills of granite soils give Sauvignon Blanc a unique character in Garçon. Within the estate here is an incredible patchwork of vineyards. We have about 1,000 different vineyard blocks that were designed by Alberto Antonini, and each vineyard block creates its own identity, and that's how you create diversity and complexity when you're making a wine like Sauvignon Blanc. When you taste a wine, you get this incredible, vibrant, salty, refreshing, the stimulating flavor that you would if you see taking in the ocean air in the morning and the foam from the waves crashing down on the beach, which is really not found anywhere else. The Sauvignon Blanc is a unique expression of the place that is Bodega Garçon. As Jose Manuel was saying, he came to the ocean of this new winery. Uruguay, just to put things in perspective, has the same amount of vineyards, the country, as Napa Valley. And Concha y Toro, where Gus and Jimenez first started his illustrious career, produces more wine than the whole country. This is Gilles de Chambieu, Master Sommelier, live from the harvest here at Bodega Garçon in Europe. Okay, I guess we'll see this one and then we'll shut it up. This is Gilles de Chambieu, Master Sommelier, live from the harvest here at Bodega Garçon in Uruguay. And I want to talk to you a little bit about their Albarino, one of the most refreshing, vibrant, crispy whites, originally from Spain. This is the first wine you have in your glass. Bodega Garçon is one of the few vineyards in South America that is close to the Atlantic Ocean. The cooling breezes refresh the grapes and slow their ripening so that they maintain their acidity and develop complex flavors. Poor ballast soils. These are the native ostriches that run around the property called the Mandu, heightening the crispness and the freshness that you expect from this grape. The result is an Albarino from Garçon that surprises you with its depth and flavor. Okay, what I wanted to show really was how really you have this diversity of topography. Uruguay is a relatively flat country and it's right next to the ocean, so cooling influence of the breezes, the Atlantic. The water is very cold, most of the currents are coming from the Antarctic. If you look at the map of South America, you'll see between Montevideo, which is the most southern port in South America, and Montevideo is actually the most southern capital of the Americas. Buenos Aires is inland up the Rio de la Plata and slightly north, as you see on the map. So Montevideo is the last stop of call if you're on a ship going around South America. So it's had a strategic role historically, even since the beginning of the Portuguese that established the country, well, the country and the little town of Colonia de Sacramento, which is just up the river. It was a neutral country during actually World War II, and there's a very famous German U-boat that docked into Montevideo and then was surrounded by the Allies. By law, it could stay there 48 hours because it was a neutral country, and then they finally went out and the German captain sunk himself with the ship outside Montevideo. So it's a country that's had a lot of Spanish, Italian immigrants, but of course it's had a lot of Basque immigrants, and hence the first grape planted in Uruguay, which is called Tanat. So hopefully I can cut this thing so I don't come on again, and we can get to not my computer. Right. We can get to the presentation on Uruguay. Uruguay, it was actually a very interesting country because it was created as a buffer zone between both Argentina and Brazil. Remember Brazil, a colonial empire of Portugal, one of the most seafaring countries that discovered a lot of the New World, and then of course Argentina and Chile, part of the Spanish colonial power. So they created, between the wars between them, this little country called Uruguay. Population 4 million people, 15 million heads of cattle, to give you an idea. And this is where it is. So they eat a lot of meat. The animals haven't taken over yet, but it's beautiful. It's the only country that actually can certify grass-fed beef. And when I was the wine director at Meadowood, we actually imported Uruguayan beef because it's superb in its quality and its origin. So that's where Montevideo, where it is, compared to Mendoza and Santiago. See the latitude height cuts across to Cape Town, South Australia and New Zealand, to give you ideas. So hence I wanted to start with the first white wine, is Albarino. Albarino, a great grape from Spain. We talked about Torrontés and the influence of the Spaniards in South America. And this was interesting because this is a Spanish grape variety that was planted by an Italian winemaker for an Argentinian in Uruguay. Just to give you an idea of the globalization of the importance of South America, Spain and Argentina. In fact, Argentina really see Uruguay as one of their provinces. They all go in and spend summer in the beaches of Uruguay. Uruguay is very famous for its beaches around the town of Punta del Este. And that's where the first wine comes from. Garzón is a small town, if you see the map, next in the region of Maldonado, northeast of Punta del Este. So this is really influenced by the South Atlantic, versus historically most of the vineyards around Montevideo, Canelones, are influenced by what we call the Rio de la Plata. Warmer as you go inland, cooler as you get towards Rocha or towards the ocean. And so one thing about Uruguay is beautiful, which is important when you're making wine, is you don't want any pollution, obviously, nearby. This is actually a problem around the city of Santiago, for example, where there's urban sprawl and Mendoza and parts of it, and Bordeaux specifically. There, it's got these amazing, I don't know if you saw in the video, lots of native wild palms. We have native animals like the nandu, the South American ostrich, the caipirosca, the caipivira, which is like the largest rodent in South America, and then roam around the vineyard. It's a very rocky coastline, as you see in the bottom right. That's the village of Jose Ignacio, which was shown on the video, which is kind of one of the the Saint-Tropez, let's say, of South America. And then Uruguay actually means land of the painted birds, or river of the painted birds. There are over 425 species of birds. And there are lots of lagoons. That's why water is such a wealth of resource for Uruguay, and that's where a lot of the eastern shore birds from Florida migrate down to Uruguay. So lots of lagoons, beautiful water, and a very pristine ecosystem. 3 million people, as I said, mostly European descendant, very democratic. It's really ranked first in democracy, peace, lack of corruption, quality of living in South America. So very high literacy rate too. Of course, as people say, being such a small country, that's an easy thing to do. But the latest president, Mujica, for example, gave 90% of his salary to charity. He also legalized same-sex marriage, marijuana, divorce, which is one of the first things for a South American country, and abortion. So very progressive, if you want to say it that way, country. This is the Economist Intelligence Unit on Democracy. You'll see that Uruguay is the only country in South America in that dark green, the same as Canada. America is a little lighter green, I believe, on the map. So 1 laptop per child, the first country to have even 1 laptop per child. And you saw in some of the pictures a lot of the wind farms, very windy, the wind from the Atlantic, since it has no oil, and it's been very progressive in developing hydroelectricity, wind power, and biomass. So over 75% of its energy use is renewable energy, which is, they made a very important speech in Paris, for example, at the World Summit on the environment last year. So 82% agriculture and lots of tourism. Okay, so that's a little bit. Beef is very prominent, and sheep and lamb. And wool, they export a lot of wool. There's a very important women's cooperative called Manos de Uruguay that does beautiful work, and you can find it in some of the top stores in New York, actually. Lots of coastlines, 410 miles of unspoiled coastline of the coast. Okay, let's get into the wines, back between the 30th and 35th parallel. And has everybody tried the first Albarino? What I wanted to highlight with this wine is the freshness and the acidity. As Jose Manuel was talking about how do you get acidity in wine? Either you pick early, or you go to places where you have big diurnal difference, like in the Valle de Uco, or you have the cooling influence of the Hummel currents in Chile, or you have altitude in Argentina, or you have the influence of the Atlantic in Uruguay. So you want this brightness, this freshness. So we make at Garçon, they make a great Sauvignon Blanc, but I thought we were going to try Chilean Sauvignon Blanc. I thought, let's make you try something different, an Albarino from Garçon. So just focus on, this is the 14, the 15 is now coming in. Remember, they're 1 vintage ahead. What I want you to concentrate on is both the freshness and the brightness of the wine linked to the acidity, and then of course the richness still, and the body and the weight linked to the sunshine. And so it's a great combination of both ripe richness but freshness, which makes this wine great for food pairing. And Albarino has become very popular in Spain, and there are only 2 Albarino producers in Uruguay, so we wanted you to have something special today. Then of course the main wine of Uruguay, so here's the quick statistics: 22,000 acres, about the size of Napa Valley, only 10 million cases produced. 200 wineries. About 20 years ago there were 500 wineries. So it's actually, if you look at the development of South Africa, it's the opposite. You had a big cooperative, and now they've sort of liberalized and opened the market, and you have lots of small producers. Chile, for example, the same thing's happened. Chile, why was it so successful as export? Because the major market was controlled by 4 or 5 big players. And in Uruguay, very individual, very, very strong family ties to winemaking and wine history. And everybody used to make wine in the old Italian and Spanish tradition. And if your vineyard didn't make it or whatever, you would never sell to your neighbor or to somebody else. You just close down. And so actually, there's been from 500, we've dropped to 200 wineries, and there's only about 25 wineries that actually export wine. So still lots of small father, and you go to these wineries and it's easy 2 generations, 3, sometimes 4 generations working together, which makes that very, very, very original. Domestic consumption, as you can see, 95%, 36 liters per capita, because of also tourism. They can sell all their wines really it's like going to Greece. You could sell all your wine to tourists coming to Greece, or used to. Now, same with Uruguay, they do export to Brazil. But of course, when the creation of Mercosur, which was a free trade agreement between Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil, and then Chile was kind of part of it, but not really into it. The Uruguayans decided, you know, we can't compete with Chilean wine, we can't compete with Argentinian wine on price and on quality. So they said the industry, we have to change and reinvent ourselves. So they really reinvented themselves in the 1970s, even though Tannat has been recorded then since the 1800s under the name of its original importer, which was a Basque named Jarigüe. So I think this is a good time to taste wine number 2, which is Tannat. So Tannat is a grape originally from, this is the Tannat from Garçon. Let's make sure we get it in the right order. So Garçon, the same producer as the Albarino. So I wanted to highlight actually 3 regions. So this is from the Maldonado region, close to Punta del Este, and these are granitic hills. Uruguay is relatively flat, but there is some hilly terrain, as you saw from the video. And this is a very young vine, but I just want to show the potential of this new region. This is a new region that is being pioneered by Alejandro Bulgaroni, who happens to be the gentleman I'm working for at the moment, or consulting for, both in Uruguay, Argentina, and we're starting a small little project here in the Napa Valley. So Tannat was thought of as rustic. It's a bit like Malbec. When we thought of French Malbec, it's rustic and harsh and bitter, and you go to Argentina and wow, it's velvety, soft, ripe, and smooth. Well, Tannat in France, and hence the name, comes from tannins. It was very bitter, astringent, very powerful, needed many years of aging. They developed a system called micro-oxygenation to soften Tannat in Madiran, the region of France, in the southwest of France, where it's grown next to the Pyrenees Mountains, near Pau, and also it's grown in the Basque region. And in Uruguay, it's really taken on its own identity. And you'll see this wine is not at all astringent, even though it's a young wine, 2013. I believe it shows that it has softness, some texture, by lowering the yields, by increasing hang time, by fermenting it very warm and in natural containers. These are all fermented in cement containers, cement tanks, and then we age in botties, very large. It's very influenced by the Italian tradition, not the small French barriques, but in large oval casks. And all the vineyards are grown, of course, organically. That's a very important philosophy of Alberto Antonini, who's the vineyard designer. So this is your first Tannat, Garçon Tannat 2013. Any comments, any questions so far? Have you seen how many people have tried Tannat before? Converts already. So the brightness on the finish too, the freshness, the acidity, that's something I wanted to highlight on this wine. And that's really the difference in the Atlantic style of growing of wine in Uruguay versus as Eduardo Enrique was saying, the continental climate, high extremes of Argentina, very hot, very cold at night, tough winters. Uruguay is a maritime climate or Mediterranean climate. It's much more rainy. We get quite a lot of rain, same rainfall as Bordeaux, and it rains all through the year actually. So there are vintage variations as opposed to Argentina, where it only rains, and if it rains, it's in the summer, and it can be hailstorms. So that was the first Tannat, 100% Tannat, even though it's not really 100% Tannat. There's a little Petit Verdot, a little Cabernet Franc, and we have a couple of unusual varieties called Marcelin and Cadillac that we also blend. One is a cross between Grenache and Cabernet, and the other one is a cross between Malbec and Cabernet. And those are doing very well, and this is kind of typical of Uruguayans, very individual, and they love to experiment and try new things. So there's Petit Manseng, that's great from the Basque region. There's of course Viognier, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, and this leads me to the second wine, which is Artisana, and this is a blend of Tannat with Merlot, which is the second most planted grape, and Zinfandel. So a little bit about Tannat and health quickly. This is a presentation sent to me by Wines of Uruguay. Not that in America you get taken to prison if you promote wine as a health thing, but in Uruguay they of course give you wine in hospitals and in prison if you have to go to either of those places, which is rather not. But so very high level, of course, polyphenols and resveratrol. Tannat much more than Merlot and Cabernet. If you actually go to Uruguay, they eat so much beef, it's kind of frightening, really. You go to an asado, I don't know, I think they're very proud this year because they took over the Argentinians at eating 36 kilos or something per head versus the Argentinian who eat also a lot of beef. But how did they not get? It's like the French paradox, you know. What was the French paradox studied? Well, in the southwest of France, where you drink Madiran, very hardy red wines that have a lot of polyphenols and anthocyanins. So also in Uruguay, the national beverage is not wine like in Argentina, but it's mate, which is this green herbal tea that you drink in a cup with a straw and you share it with people. You can't actually order it. You have to make it yourself and it's shared around. And it's a bit like green tea in the Japanese culture. Very good, very high antioxidant. So having both tanat and mate, they can just eat red meat and drink those things and have no cholesterol issue at all. Maybe dancing tango helps too, I don't know. But of course the Uruguayans will tell you they invented tango and not the Argentinian. The first soccer ball was made by Uruguayan leather, by the British, actually taken to England. The British developed a lot of Uruguay and took all the beef and built all the railroads like they did in England. And they invaded actually Montevideo as well. Then the French and Napoleon fought them off, and then the Argentinians all got together and after unfortunately killing all the Indians and everything else took over the country. So red varieties, Tanat, Merlot. So I wanted to try a Tanat Merlot blend. There's some Tanat Tempranillo Merlot blends as well, but this is a very small boutique producer, like most. There's no big corporations in Uruguay. There's no international consultants yet in Uruguay. Michel Roland, who I like, a personal friend, doesn't consult yet in Uruguay. Paul Hobb actually doesn't either. So it's still an emerging country that has a strong regional and individual character, let's say. So this is a artisana. It's a great. I love this because in honor of Diana, we wanted to balance the sexes. We never have enough women on the podium and women winemakers. So this is actually a team of only women, a winemaker and a viticulturalist. And the owner, Leslie, who sent us the wine, is an American that lives in Santa Barbara, but fell in love with Uruguay. She visited, and they invested in this little vineyard in the region of Canelones, which is the area right next around Montevideo, originally called that because most of the immigrants were from the Canary Islands. And she thought, I'm American, well, why don't I plant Zinfandel? And this is the only planting of Zinfandel in Uruguay. I don't know how much Zinfandel there is in Argentina, probably none either. So it's like totally unique, and she does make 100% Zinfandel just for the Uruguayan market because they love it, it's so different. But for the US, she only exports this wine, which is the blend. So Tanat, we've obviously Merlot that always softens and gives you a middle palate. Tanat maybe as the framework, the structure of the wine, the body, the architecture. Then you need the softening of what we call the middle palate of Merlot, that fills the hole in the donut, so to speak, and gives you this softness. It's like the flesh around the bone, and then you have the tension. And Zinfandel, of course, we know it's an interesting variety. It can be sometimes very ripe, but also it can be very quite high in acidity and freshness because there's a very lot of uneven ripening within a cluster of Zinfandel. So this is the only wine in the world that's Tanat, Zinfandel, and Merlot, and we're very lucky to have it today here. So did everybody taste it? Any comments? Any questions? Yes.
So Tanat is a varietal. And how long do you think it will take to come to the United States to be grown as some of the other?
Good question. There are some Tanat. The question is Tanat is a varietal. You know, there is internationalization, as we were talking earlier, about grape varieties. So some varieties travel well, Chardonnay, Cabernet. Some don't as well, like Nvwl, very hard to plant. Sangiovese, harder too. You know, Fiorentino tried to plant Sangiovese, grafted everything back to Cabernet. So there isn't a category as such. Of course, when you were replicating the classics of Europe, and that's what we were talking about with Augustin, you're looking to Europe, you travel to Europe. We as Americans need to start looking north-south rather than east-west. Our reference shouldn't be the old world. We should be looking pan-American and really figure out what's unique. Chile is so much more like California than Bordeaux, of course. In fact, Bordeaux is more like Uruguay. Uruguay is more like Bordeaux. So I think there's a little bit of planting of Tanat. Maybe Enrique, do you know anything about from your work at UC Davis? But there's very little. Like how much Malbec is there in California? Very little as well. Yeah. There's more Malbec than Tannat, but Tannat would do well here. Yeah, so there are a couple. I know Yves Rousseau, there's a producer that makes a rosé, Tannat, but so it's small, so it's not really a category, and that's okay. Uruguay is obviously not trying to take over the world. It's this is like an insider's wine. You say, wow, I had Albarino from Uruguay, or Tannat from Uruguay. It's really for the connoisseurs or the sensual amateurs of wine, like we all are. As Augustine was saying, is how do we talk about what's quality, what's pleasure in wine, and wine makes you travel, wine takes you to a place. Wine is about a new experience, sharing that experience, and obviously some of you have been to Uruguay, which is fantastic because it's like everything. Once you go to Tuscany and taste a Brunello or Chianti, or you go to Santorini and try their wines, you then have an emotional connection to the place. And so Tannat is unique and different, and that's what we want to all embrace, is the diversity in the world. So, if they plant a lot of Tannat in California, would that be good for Uruguay? Maybe long term, because they'd get attention, but is it the best thing for Uruguay, or is it the best thing for California? Probably not. So, but good question. You have a question?
Because you don't think that Tannat would grow well?
No, I think Malbec would do well, but Malbec is sensitive to hydric stress, a bit like Merlot, so you have to be careful. Tannat also needs a little, it's a bit like Mourvèdre, it needs a little humidity, but you need sunshine to ripen, and you need a long hang time, which we have a long. Do you have any comments? Because we have a viticulturist on.
Yeah, what I know, because in Mendoza we grew Tannat where I worked, and it's a long season varietal, so it's pretty much like Cabernet Sauvignon. So you need a long season. You cannot, probably for the cold coastal areas of California, like Carneros, probably will not be the choice, but for more inland could be.
Rebecca, any comments? I'm just giving you wine for because I don't think it's important.
Oh, yes, thank
On
you.
the last point.
No, I do know there is some Tannat here.
Oh, really?
And it is from the warmer regions. I only know of one producer who does it like 100% Tannat, probably isn't Tannat.
Right.
He's actually from Monterey.
You was
So,
Yeah.
did the varietal originate in
Yeah,
Uruguay?
in France.
No,
No, no.
France.
It's a French variety.
It's a French variety.
Uruguay and
Sorry, I didn't get that clear. It
Yeah.
originated from Maniron.
From Monterey.
That's
So
reason.
it's a French variety that's known for having strength.
right, and can grow in those types of conditions.
Yeah, southwest of France is very warm, southwest, and it's continental. This is Bordeaux by the ocean. This is right to the Pyrenees, so powerful, rich wine. This is where D'Artagnan, the Three Musketeers were. This is where they, have foie gras, eat duck, play rugby, have bullfights. You need a good glass of wine after a day like that. So that's where Maniron step comes in. So that's really important. Okay, last but not least, because I know we're going on time, the Amat. I wanted to show this wine, and it was very hard to find because this is from the library of the Carral family, who have been making wine since, I want to say 17 something. Let me see, it doesn't tell you on this. It's one of the, 1790, 1790 to 1860, wow. This guy lived a long time. He did. For those days, he lived to 70 years in the 1700. So this is one of the oldest families in Uruguay, the Carral family. And they're originally from Spain, made wine in Spain, moved to Uruguay, and settled around Montevideo. Montevideo, as the name is the capital, and it means I see a mountain, Monte, mountain, Vida, I see, eu, I see, in old Portuguese, because that's when the Portuguese came into the Bay of Montevideo. And they, of course, made, most wine regions, great regions that developed close to markets, because historically, as Enrique said, the importance of railroad transformed Argentina. All the wines had to go through the Inca Empire, through Peru. That's where the Viceroy of Peru was. And you couldn't cross that whole desert in the Pampa. The wine would taste terrible by the time it got to Buenos Aires. So wine region, Champagne, probably one of the most difficult, worst regions to make wine in France. But it was close to Paris, and you could go by boat to Paris. Hence, Champagne developed. The Rhone River, the Rhine River, the Loire Valley, the Loire River. Bordeaux is a very important port. Porto as a port of Oporto to export the wines to the British Empire. So So Argentina, very difficult, and of course Montevideo, very close to the capital, you just brought all your grapes and produce. So all the wine region was really centered in this area. Now they're realizing with technology and innovation, we need to find new areas. These heavier soils, clay soils may not be the best for the climate, so hence the development of Maldonado and the Garçon, the granite foothill there. It's the same granitic soil that's in Namibia. Remember, South America and Africa were one continent at the time of Gondwana. So one of the most ancient soils in the world. And so people have been experimenting with new areas, and I wanted to show you Artesana, which is from a classic region, Garçon from a pioneering region, and then Amat, which is from Cerro Chapu, which is the area in yellow on the map. You see in the top right-hand corner in the Rivera department, right on the border with Brazil. Cerro Chapu means, Cerro means mountain, and Chapu means the shape of a hat. It's like a mesa, like a Hopi mesa, if you want to visualize it. And the Carral family, even though they've been making wine since the 1700s, decided to pioneer this totally new area. As opposed to Jose Manuel saying, I would never go to a new area, I don't have the courage of doing that, I need to go to an established area. They went to this totally new area. They were very smart because what's the biggest market for Uruguayan wine? Brazil. And at that time, Brazil was very protectionist. So they actually planted half of their vineyards in Brazil, on the Brazilian side, their winery, and they crossed the vineyard. There's no border patrol there, no walls to separate it. And they decided to then make wine both in Brazil and in Argentina. And for me, this is one of the best. I hope this is showing well, because the wine just arrived yesterday from the East Coast, and it's the 2001. So this is a wine that's now 15 years old, Tannat. And 100% Tannat from a warm climate, sandy soils, from the Carral family, who make really great wines. How's it tasting, Enrique? You like it? Yeah. So, I mean, it's got some of the balsamic note of the mulled wine, a little bit more than the 2007 Alpha Cruz that had the elegance in the vintage. But and I think it shows the characters of Tannat. What's interesting is, of course, we're now in 2016. This is like tasting a Napa Cabernet from like the 70s or 80s. The revolution that's happened in Uruguay between 2001 and 2015 is incredible. It's a bit like the revolution from the 70s to 2000 or the 90s in California. So these were very young vines at the time. They may have been only 4 or 5 years old, I can remember. And so this wine just shows you the potential. It's still a little stringent on the finish. I mean, that's why you get the tan for me. It's not complete that way. Hence, I sometimes like the blending of Merlot or Cabernet Franc or Petit Verdot. But it gives you an idea of how Tannat, this wine is on a plateau. It's not, it's a little aromatically, but texturally, it's a very young wine still and has great aging potential. So that's Tannat from Amat and the Carral family in Cerro Chapu. Different terroirs, a few pictures of Uruguay, nothing. I love that they're very proud that everything is, of course, dry farming, because it rains a lot, so you don't have to farm, that's fun. And the other slide I like, small scale production, it says everything is picked by hand, and that's because no winery can afford a picking machine anyway. And just to import it to Uruguay would be totally cost prohibitive. But it is like old Burgundy, where you invite your friends and neighbors and the intellectuals from the city love to come out to the vineyards and pick grapes and have big long lunches. It's really the old traditional approach to wine and viticulture, and that connection to the land, to this beverage which had religious symbolism in their culture, and now is really part of the political and philosophical discussion. And nothing makes better discussion at a meal than a glass of wine, obviously. So that's a little bit about Uruguay. Any questions about Uruguay before we move on to Chile? Yes, sir.
So Uruguay clearly seems to have quite a robust heritage, but in many ways it also seems to represent sort of a new frontier as far as winemaking is concerned. I'm curious why it hasn't garnered more international consultant attention.
Yeah, good question. Why hasn't Uruguay, paraphrase, garnered more international attention? One, because it's a very small country. So It's not on, you look at, it was kind of an irony that The Economist named it Country of the Year, because if you look at The Economist and you look at the statistic, GDP, whatever, Uruguay doesn't appear anywhere, because it's not even big enough to go into any global statistic. And in fact, the president, Mujica, was famous saying, we don't want to be judged by GDP, whatever, we want a quality of life index. We want a pleasure index. How do you define quality of life? We'd rather be judged by that. You know, the biggest banknote is a woman poet, for example, not some military dictator, for example. Women got to vote there in 1904, I think, before the United States, before France, my country. So it's a different direction, and they're very happy with their own world, and protectionism, you know, sometimes creates isolationism, which means you maintain something, but that means, you know, they're not that dynamic. Let's say, I would say, mate may be a tradition, you sit around, you drink it. They're not, the volume is so little, and remember, if you have to sell to the US, you have to compete with Chile and Argentina, and the cost of living and the cost of labor is probably 3 times the price in Uruguay than it is in Argentina. In Argentina, maybe you pay $40 a day for a worker in the vineyard. You know, in Uruguay, you're paying them maybe $10 an hour, $5 an hour. I mean, it's very expensive. I mean, it's a little Switzerland, South America. It's where all the banks are. It's people stay there because it's very secure, very safe. Guston was talking about kidnapping and whatever. That would not happen in Uruguay. So they don't have a lot of volume. One, they have a very thirsty local market, but remember that was a downfall for really Argentina not evolving. And so they're starting, now slowly but surely you're going to get to see Uruguay. You're at the forefront, and you're one of the first, you can be one of the first ambassadors for Uruguay around America. Okay. Yes?
So do you say that's because Uruguay is content with their place and they don't need any consultants?
Yeah, I've worked, you know, I actually did consult for wineries in Uruguay for a while, like 10 years, and you know, they're not, I wouldn't say, not in a negative way, but you know, different people have different ambitions, and they have a great lifestyle, they have a great, you put that list there, the restaurants are open 3 months of the year, that's it. From December to March, then they're closed. They said that's the season, and they can make enough money in 3 months to just enjoy the rest of the time relaxing. I mean, it's a crazy, you know, we work, I mean, I'm from France, so it's somewhere in between. You know, in America, we think we work too hard. In France, we think nobody works. And so they just, you know, the scale of things, they have this new organization, Wines of Uruguay, 15 producers, export. But, you know, it's like everything, like herding cat, they're so individual. It's like the American spirit in Napa Valley. You know, in France, we have cooperatives, because when you have a lot of growers, small growers, how do you have the capital to buy equipment? This is a very capital-intensive industry. You know, as I say, you buy an expensive coffee machine and you can only use it 2 months of the year. No. In the wine business, so in France, we have a system called cooperatives. In America, that never worked because we're very strong and individual. Same thing in Uruguay. They're Italian and Basque, very tough individuals, and you know, they don't need to grow and expand. So that's part of the charm. When you go there, it's like going back to America in the 1940s or something, 50s. Any other questions? Yes?
Can you give us an indication of the prices of these wines?
Sure, of course. Good question. Thank you for asking. So the Garçon Albarino, I think, is around $12 to $15. Garçon Tanat is also is $18 to $20. The Artisana, I think it's a little bit more. I would say like 25. I didn't see the text sheet. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact price because it was generously donated by Artisana. But I would say, you know, that's back to this philosophy. There's no $100 Tanat from Uruguay. People, you know, this Garçon project, you saw it on the video, it's the first LEED certified winery in South America. As Jose Manuel said, it's an $85 million project in Uruguay, creating, you know, native palm trees and keeping all the thing. The guy sells the wine for $20. He has an optical sorting machine like this one. But that's the point. That I'm not going to make a $100 wine. They're much more humble. We want to make the best value and over deliver. That's kind of the philosophy, which is really also the tradition of Chile historically. Argentina came in and priced themselves a little higher than Chile, the way New Zealand sort of priced themselves above Australia. And so Uruguay is, we want you to discover the wine. If you're going to spend $40, $50 and not like the wine, then you'll never taste it again. At $20, everybody will give it up. They make a Garçon Reserva that's $30. But the vines are young, so this is, as Jose Manuel quite rightly explained, it's about legacy. This business, 15-year rate of return on investment on a vineyard, you're really planning for the long term, and all vines, as he talked about, are key. So sure, technology innovation can really help new vineyards, but still, you have to be patient, and if you're from a European tradition, there's a certain, let's say, humility in pricing, because wine is a beverage, not a luxury good as such. Okay, but we can go back and forth, and yeah, go ahead, sorry. The last one, price, thank you very much. This is actually not very expensive either. I think it's about $40. Well, value is what you believe in it. But of course, this is a 2001. I think they are selling a 2007. He said you can go online. I don't know if it's Beverage and More or something, Wine Searcher, and you can see some older vintages. Because you said nobody knows this wine, nobody's heard of it, and you can get wines that are 10 years old for $30, $40, which I think are really great value. You serve that at a dinner or at a tasting with your groups and friends, and you really, you'll look good, obviously. And it's only $30, $40, which for a wine which is mature. Okay, great. Well, we can go back and forth to talk about both, but now I really wanted to contrast with Chile. And how's your microphone? Is it on? Over there, Rebecca. So I wanted to introduce Rebecca. Rebecca is actually a lady from Washington, DC. DC. And she visited Napa Valley with her parents early on, and she loved the winemaking and all the discussion around winemaking and viticulture. So she pursued a degree in chemistry and biology at Macalester College. Where is that? I don't know.
St. Paul, Minnesota.
St. Paul, Minnesota. Hell yes. And really good. As we know, every state in America makes wine now. Even though there's a lot of cross there, there's a lot of hybrids, and she studied abroad though and has an international experience. Went to Australia. Then came back and worked at UC Davis, where she earned a master's degree in viticulture and enology. And thank you, Davis, and thank you for all the students from Davis here. You're in a great place. She loved Tuscany, so moved to Tuscany and worked for Tenuta de Ornellaia, no less, in Bulgaria. And then she worked for the Stagnant family here in Napa Valley, and then was winemaker at Rudd, and worked there with Michel Roland. And then went to Buscella in 2009 and worked there till 2000, small boutique Cabernet producer, and worked there till 2015 and just moved last year to Quintessa. So she's going to I'm going to talk generally about Chile, and she's going to put in, because she's not the winemaker from Chile, but there's obviously the philosophy of the Veneas family, from organic farming to biodynamics to pioneering new regions has been very important. So the first white wine, do you want to tell us a little bit about the first white? And then
Yes,
I can
the first white is the 2015 Ritual Sauvignon Blanc. Ritual Sauvignon Blanc from Casablanca. And so, as a Napa winemaker, I'm going to relate everything back to here. Casablanca is a cool region of Chile that Augusto Huneeus pioneered going into. It's between Santiago and Valparaiso, which I'm probably pronouncing everything incorrectly. So the Sauvignon Blanc is planted to the coolest part of this vineyard, in fact, on a north-facing slope. The soils here are mica granitic soils with a sandy loam texture. So this is climatically closest akin to Russian River Valley here in California, if I think about it that way. This is also actually, as I spoke with the winemaker down in Chile, it's Sauvignon Blanc Clone 1, which is also the most widely planted Sauvignon Blanc clone in California as well. But, let's taste the wine. We can talk, I think there is an international style here to this Sauvignon Blanc, but also something particularly Chilean about it.
Now, as Augustine was briefly saying this morning when he talked about Carmenere, the discovery of varieties in the New World brought to Americas before phylloxera. As you know, phylloxera was this root house that was taken over to Europe from, anybody from Alabama? From Alabama, I know, accidentally by the British. We French don't think it was really that accidental. But when steamships started crossing the Atlantic, the journey was so much shorter, so instead of bringing plants, or cuttings and seeds, they brought actual live plants and survived on those plants some of the greatest diseases which wiped out pretty much all the wine industry in Europe between 1870 and 1910, powdery mildew, or oidium, downy mildew, and this root louse called phylloxera, which really ravaged the vineyard and changed the sort of economic and social situation of Europe. And you know, Chateau Yquem likes to say we haven't made a good wine since about 1870, since we had to use American Rousseau. So, joking about, but didn't say that. So Chile is amazing because it brought all its vineyards pre-1850. Remember that wave of the gentleman farmer in the 19th century in Chile when you wanted to emanate Bordeaux or France, French culture. So they brought in French winemakers, French barrels, French grapes. And as Augustin was saying, these were mixed. In the old days, you wouldn't have planted grape varieties in single blocks by variety, a bit like we still have old vineyards in California called mixed blacks, or what we call field blends. And so that's how the varieties were planted in Europe at the time as well. So Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Malbec, Petit Verdot, and Carmenère was the 5 varieties from Bordeaux, and Cabernet Franc took 6. And Carmenère was kind of rediscovered through ampelographical research. Well, same thing with Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc for a long time in Chile was actually another variety called Sauvignonasse or Sauvignon Vert, which was very different than what we call true Sauvignon Blanc. So there's been a whole work in researching that in Chile as well, and there's nothing wrong now. There's Sauvignon Gris, there's other varieties within to broaden. And this is the Aconcagua Valley. Is this where this one is from? Casablanca. Sorry. Casablanca Valley is a bit like, as we were saying, Russian River or Carneros, or the Sonoma coast. It's really pushing the edge. It's moving Chile, and you have our map here, away from the Central Valley, which is not negative connotation like our Central Valley, because the Central Valley of Chile is between the Precordillera and the Andes, and we're really talking about Costa, Precordillera, and mountain and Andes now. We're really, like we were talking about, we need to talk about places and not just Argentinian wine, Valle de Uco, Luján de Cuya, Salta. Same thing with Chile, we're really pushing the envelope and talking about appellation. And Argentina, we know altitude is key. Chile, proximity to the ocean. Even if you're on the coastal range, if you're east facing, you get warmer end, and if you're going up in altitude, you want to be east facing to get maximum sunshine. So Casablanca is a challenging area because it's far from urban centers. So there's real labor issue. It's very difficult to get water. You can't get runoff from the Andes because there's no canals built by the Incas. You're way too far, so you have to dig deep, very deep bore wells. So water and labor is an issue. So it's not, quote, the perfect well, like we were talking about, and the same with Enrique talking about Argentina. Argentina, if you don't have the Comero, which is the local government official that opens the floodgates and lets water on your property, you're dead. You can't get, and we're digging wells at 200, 300, 400, 500 meters, sometimes 600 meters. And then the energy cost to take that water out of the ground is, if you have to look at that, what's your energy cost versus the value of your end product? And some people have gone bankrupt because it's too expensive to get. So water, as we know, is a political issue everywhere in the world. It's really the big problem for the future. And so water is a problem, even in Argentina, not just with salinity, as Enrique was saying, but even in Chile, these far new regions, and Uruguay. Okay, the second wine, then.
Second wine
Primus.
is the Primus. So this is a 2014 Cabernet Sauvignon. It's from the Maipo region, which, I'll talk about the region first, and then I'll say where I think it is akin to a California region. So this is a drier and warmer region than any of the northern regions in Chile. Very low annual rainfall, and that rainfall is concentrated in the winter. It's an area surrounded by hillsides with an alluvial soil with a silty clay loam, and a Mediterranean climate of very warm days and cool nights. This is very much like Napa.
Maipo was like the most famous area maybe still is, and because of its proximity to Santiago, the city, this is where it's like Grave region, or where Aubryon is in Bordeaux. A gentleman could go on his horse carriage to his vineyard and his winery estate, and he probably have horses and polo fields and everything else too. And but of course, Santiago, like Mendoza, has been growing. Unfortunately, in the 80s, a lot of great vineyards in Mendoza, old Malbecs, were ripped up for development. And you know how important Napa Valley has been in preserving itself, thank God to many rules that we voted in creating, Napa as an agricultural preserve. Otherwise, we would be in the same situation as Santa Clara Valley. But those things have happened to Mendoza, and they're happening to Bordeaux. If you go to, has anybody been to Chateau Aubryon, one of the great first growth? It is surrounded by, buildings and houses and developments. There's a railroad that goes right through the property. So we have to protect our agricultural land, and of course the pressure on development and land pricing is something. So Maipo has been really, all the historical wineries from Santa Carolina to Santa Rita are there, but some of the best vineyards are now up in the Puente Alto region, where Alma Viva is, which is a joint venture between Concha y Toro and Mouton Rothschild. And so Maipo is really the classic Cabernet of Chile. That's why I wanted to show a Chilean Cabernet from this. What is the price to the first Sauvignon Blanc, just to get an idea of that?
It's actually very reasonable.
I want to say $12 or
I want to say like 10 or 12.
$10 or $12, yeah. And this Primus Cabernet is also classic of what the great value that Chile can deliver. This is also probably $15, I would guess.
I think it is too. And I think it's a wine that, if anyone has any comments about the wine, it is a wine that has true character to so that quality to price ratio that you can get in Chile.
If you want to taste pure Cabernet, this I don't think there is no Carmenere in this blend.
No,
you can read it down. This is a pure, we call Cassis of Cabernet. It has a red fruit, but a dark fruit as well. It has some tannin, but it's brightness. It has some freshness to it. It's really a classic. Compare that if you go back to your Malbec and see the difference in structure and in weight and in texture between Malbec and high altitude, UV light, desert character versus Andes coastal influence of two different varieties. One soft wine, one more structured. This is, as Augustin was saying, they refer to this their wine in Bordeaux. They didn't call it by the grapes. And this is what would be like classic claret, let's say, from the old days. A real pure expression of Cabernet.
And I do want to just take a moment to mention, you mentioned freshness. And I think that is what you were talking about regions now, and not specifically about calling these New World wines by their varieties. We want to talk about regions. And I think Chile, with its unique aspects of the Humboldt Current, that large shift between sunny, warm days and cool nights. The key theme running through all these wines is that freshness.
Exactly. And I know we're trying to always, wine can't compete with certain beverages. That's why we try to start with, sparkling wine or maybe an aromatic Torrontés. But I think that gives you this beautiful balance that we get. So the third wine is Santa Carolina, the 2012 Reserva de la Familia Cabernet. So after Maipú, we wanted to highlight another region, and this is a region a little bit more south. If you have your detailed map, you have Maipo in the north, where Puente Alto and where Santiago is, and Pirque. Then you go south, and you have the Cachopal Valley. Part of the bigger region is called Rapel, and within that we have a sub-region called Colchagua that we'll be tasting in detail. But on this one, what does it tell us on the bottle? This is from the Cachopal Valley in the Rapel. So this is one of the oldest wineries in Chile, also founded in the 1800s. And I wanted to show the move to Chile has been, of course, moving away from the city. So moving either towards the coast or moving south and going either up into the Andes or in the Precordillera or going to cooler region. In fact, this region was really pioneered by Miguel Torres the Spanish vintner. He was one of the first international vintners to invest in Chile. And then after him was the Lafite Rothschild, actually, that invested in a vineyard called Los Vascos in Curico as well. And that at the time, at a difficult time for the military regime in the late 70s, 80s. And Santa Carolina is one of the sort of classic wineries of Chile, like Concha y Toro, like Cusino Macul, maybe, like a few others that are Carmen, that really old family winery. And this winery actually was voted best wineries of the New World last year by, I think, the Canton magazine, or Wine Enthusiast voted. So I thought we'd contact them, and they were kind enough to send us a couple of wines. I said we want a pure Cabernet, and then we want a Carmenere. So this is their Cabernet that we want to highlight after the Maipo of Primus. We want to try the Santa Carolina 2012 Reserva de la Familia. I think what you get in Chilean wine is there's always this bay leaf or olive on the nose. There's always this wonderful sort of, and California is something we don't like, kind of green or herbal element, but it's kind of becoming more, people are now going back to it's okay, you can't over-ripen fruit. Obviously with Chile, remember when we looked at the statistics that Enrique gave us when Argentina was 8th producer and was 8th largest vineyard in the world, but 5th producer. Spain, for example, has the most vineyards in the world, but it's only 3rd in the production. That's because their yields are very low, because they have all vines, or is it because they take long naps and siestas every day? Probably a bit of both. But why would they take long nap? Because it's hot, and during the day, what does that mean? Dehydrating, and they can't irrigate. Chile and Argentina, you can irrigate. It's like anything, you're given a tool, how do you manage that tool? Do you overuse it? It takes a while to fine-tune the tool. And that's been the problem with Chile for a long time, when people have really over-irrigated, if I can say that, since there's nobody Chilean on the panel, and fertilized, because of course very sandy soil sometimes in the hills versus the gravelly, and that's why you get some sort of green herbal. A little of that is good, but canopy management is important, and controlling yield, both in Argentina, as Enrique was talking about Bonarda, and the success of Bonarda. So you always get that little thing, and there's been real correction in yields in Chile, and precision farming. And the Chileans learn very fast. They're very smart, let's say, as viticulturists. Yes, you have a question?
The wood product for the barrels, does that originate in South America, or are you importing it from Europe or the United States?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. Can you repeat the question?
About the barrels that we use in Chile, they're French or American oak.
Yeah, good question.
For the Primus, and then, so for the main ones, these are all French oak.
Yeah, originally they used to use Rowley, which is the local root, and that wasn't very good. Remember, if you were selling your wine to English supermarkets, and they're saying, sorry, $5.99, how can you invest? And that's why Chile was kind of stuck in this mold of good fruit, very good exporters of table grapes, of dairies, of whatever. But if nobody was going to pay more, and I know when when Robert Mondavi did a joint venture with the Errázuriz family and came out with this wine called Senya, and it was, $50. The press went crazy. They were like, how can you charge $50 for a wine from Chile? Well, you can't leave everybody to keep everything in their poverty. If you want them to make better wines, they need to invest in technology, know-how, people, and you have to charge more. And he was able to break through that barrier. And now, still, Chile is very reasonable. There are not a lot of wines at $100, which is good for us as the consumers, we're in this golden age of opportunities of great wine. But I think French oak, American oak, maybe that's actually made by French coopers as well. And of course, at a certain price point, not the wine we're taking, there are lots of oak additives that would be used in white wine, not in Sauvignon or in Chardonnay, for example, that sort of thing. So, how does that compare? How do you think of the second Cabernet versus the 4? It's not as, because it's, I don't want to say a most serious wine, it's not as open, it's not as generous, I think, at the moment.
It had more of the herbal characteristics and a little bit more age.
I think it reflects well the Cochapal Valley, and that's why I wanted to, the next wine, Santa Carolina 2009, going back, Herencia Carmenere. So I wanted you to try 100% Carmenere, and then we'll be tasting the spirit of Apalta, which is a Carmenere blend. So Carmenere is really, it's interesting because it's kind of the secret weapon for Chile, but a bit like your question regarding Uruguay, they've been very quiet about it and they haven't been very confident about promoting Carmenere. I think the first Carmenere single variety was made in 1990 by Carmen, by Alvaro Espinosa at the time. It was a while back, but everybody thought, you could sell Merlot, and if you had Carmenere, nobody's going to buy it. Nobody's heard of this grape. So, and remember, selling Meritage or blends is harder. Selling brands or name places like Côte Chapal or Terigaki or some of the complicated sort of Indian Mapuche names that exist in Chile. So, for a long time, they kind of just kept quiet and said, we call it Chile, we call it Merlot, and we won't tell anybody. But finally it's come out, and they're kind of coming out of the closet, so to speak, the Chileans with Carmenere. And so this is but Carmenere is a late variety like Tanat. It's more like Petit Verdot really, in its cycle, even later. And so if it was intermixed with Merlot, which is an earlier ripening variety, you can imagine you picked it and it was always very green. I mean, you can tell by the red tip on the tips of flowering or the veins. Would you like to say anything on Carmenere?
Oh, sure. Actually, we grow some Carmenere on the Quintessa estate, and it's a very interesting varietal. It is the first to bud break, first to abrasion, and the last to pick. So you need to have a very long growth cycle in order to be able to get it to ripeness. And what it is, it's beautiful. I really love this wine. It has these bright fruit flavors, and then also this very interesting, and to say it out loud, I guess doesn't sound so good, a little bit like a jalapeno.
Yeah, herbal jalapeno,
But
balsamic,
in a positive way.
soy character, nutmeg. This is a beautiful wine. Very rich. The core of it, I mean, just the center of this wine. You don't see any of the tannins, they're very well integrated. It's concentrated without really being heavy. And remember, this is a wine that's already, 6 years old, 7 years old. Remember 2009, they picked it in March, April 2009. So it really shows the best part of Carmenere. This is an expensive wine though. This is, I think, the most expensive wine I think in the portfolio, even actually I don't know about the price of the yen, but I think this is around $70, $80 a bottle. Made you hungry? Hint. 1 o'clock, perfect. Correct, good side here. Lunch. This is food. Okay, so that's the Carmenere. Did everybody love this Carmenere? I think it's a really, thank you very much, Santa Carolina, really very, very superb wine. Okay, and last but not least, actually we saved the best to last, so hopefully this won't disappoint us. I tasted wine in New York about a year ago and I was really impressed by it. So Rebecca, do you want to say something about Nayette and the project with Vineyard too? It's an old...
This is an incredible wine to taste because it really is a slice of history. What is so unique about Chile is that they haven't had the collapse lapse. So the vineyard here in Apalta is one of the oldest wine estates in the New World. The vines here are, the oldest ones are 130 years old. So obviously unrooted, not irrigated. We do have expanded the vineyard and they're considered younger vines, 35 years old. Whereas here in Napa Valley, we often consider it 20-year-old vines.
Yeah.
So it really is this amazing opportunity to taste this. It's a blend from Carmenere and Cabernet Sauvignon, not irrigated, old vine. So you get this intense, complex concentration. The Apalta vineyard itself is nestled into this kind of horseshoe-shaped ring of mountains, so it's protected from the wind. It's a very arid climate, granite soils, so really, really well draining and very wide daily temperature shift, which is a winemaker something you look for because it helps you ripen your grapes and maintain your acidity.
Palta is a really special region, so it's in that same area, the Rapel. It's a sub-region. There's actually a winery called Clos Palta that you may have tried. It was actually voted Wine of the Year by Wine Spectator a few years ago. It's a project from Alexandra Marnier-Lapostole, the Grand Marnier family of France, who was one of the pioneering sort of women that came into Chile, and there's a whole movement of actually very important women winemakers in Chile too. And that's really a superb wine. It's a new project called Vic, which is a very ambitious project as well in Palta. So, of course, I believe Augusto Nunez mentioned something about Aurelio Montes. The Montes family have a property there, and I know that Nunez, I think, oh no, is it Concha Toro, have the largest biodynamic vineyard right there in Palta, the largest biodynamic vineyard in the world. And you know, and that's an important point, that vineyards, the climate, the health of things, vineyard is, and Chile is one of these magical places, and you should care for the environment, and it can be organic and then certified and even biodynamic the way Quintessa is. This vineyard is organically certified
organic and
biodynamic. And I know, yeah, well, yeah, the two, they don't need to verify, why should we pay that money? But that's okay. So this is, I think that what the wine shows, I love the Carmenere, but you showed the difference of the blend and how the Cabernet created really a structure around it, a sort of wrapped its sort of velvet coat around it, and gave it shoulders and really added a complexity. And that's what I think wines are, some blends are the greatest expression of a wine. Blends of blogs, blends of clones, blends in diversity, and really expressing a place. That's really important. So thank you very much for your time. I think